There were always problems for everyone, but most of them always started with big money. Seo Yujin was just an ordinary girl, but with an unusual fate. If it weren't for that cursed debt, she would have simply remained poor and ordinary. None of this would have ever happened to her. And she would have never crossed paths with such a dangerous beast. But if it was written in her fate, there was no way to escape it. All she could do was accept things as they were. When Seo Yujin met him, she didn't fully understand the situation at first. But deep down, she knew she could handle it, even if sometimes she was scared. Whispers spread across the office. Mr. Jin Tayo was coming back home. As always, the sharp sound of the CEO's expensive heels echoed through the hall as she rushed to her office, greeting employees along the way. Whenever employees saw the CEO, they'd straighten up and greet her politely, making sure she noticed them at their desks. Yujin overheard the news about CEO's younger brother return, and it made her uneasy. Once the CEO's office door closed, everyone finally breathed easier. Some employees started asking who Jin Tayo was and why the CEO seemed so furious. Rumor had it that the CEO's younger brother was coming home, and that's why she was so angry. People said every family had that one difficult child. Some even whispered they might not be real siblings. Jin Seoryong was the CEO of the company, but describing Jin Tayo with just the word complicated was an understatement. While Seoryong was away, Executive Director Yoon wanted to meet her. The CEO wondered what he wanted. Maybe he had problems of his own, but she was already furious and distracted by her brother's return. And honestly, that return was a big problem. After all, he didn't exactly run away from home, lose his mind over women, or become some kind of social outcast. On the surface, he seemed normal, just as expected. But the truth was, Jin Tayo was a cruel bastard. Even though he hid behind many masks, his true nature always slipped through. And it wasn't a kind one. She remembered him as a quiet, normal child. Even when other kids teased him, he didn't seem to care. Tayo was 10 years old when he finally realized something was wrong. That's when everything began to change. A group of bullies approached him after school. He looked like a kid from a rich family, easy prey. The boy panicked and bit the one who scared him the most, desperately trying to protect himself. That single bite was the first step toward the person he would become. Tayo bit so hard the skin tore, and that moment became his trigger, the beginning of serious psychological problems. Violence often starts this way. Maybe it's a survival instinct. But after that day, no one could stop him. One day, his father left Tayo outside the house as punishment, refusing to let him in until he admitted what he'd done wrong. It was one of the coldest days ever recorded. In the end, a battle of pride ended with Tayo collapsing after 5 hours and 17 minutes. If they had been even a little later, he might have lost his arms and legs to frostbite. One autumn day, before graduating college, Tayo decided to enlist in the army. Leaving only a few words behind, he volunteered to become an officer. The whole family was shocked, but their reaction wasn't the right one. He joined the military without asking anyone's opinion. And honestly, his family tried to fix him afterward, but the truth is, he was just born a monster. 3 years later, Tayo returned to Korea after serving in a conflict zone most people never even got close to. Seoryong was sure that Director Yoon couldn't just leave without a scandal, and asked who made sure he left quietly. Manager Kim replied that Secretary Seo Yujin had brought him coffee, and shortly after that, he left. The CEO knew very well that secretaries had ways to handle things like this. Jin Seoryong asked Secretary Yujin to come to her office. Meanwhile, she wondered if maybe it was worth keeping an eye on him. We're talking about 50 million. Nobody could quite believe it. It was a huge amount. Of course, it was just the first investment, not a salary. And what about 10 million won a month? Was that really too little? Her younger brother was supposed to finish his military service in 5 years, but only 3 years had passed, and now he was coming back. The CEO thought he might need some help. It seemed simple enough: follow his schedule and escort him when needed. Most importantly, she'd need daily reports, 3 months max. The CEO planned to transfer her to the planning department afterward, a job Yujin had always dreamed of. But Seo Yujin didn't understand. If this was so simple, why her? The CEO wanted her to keep an eye on her brother, to make sure he didn't cause trouble. She believed Yujin could handle it perfectly. Yujin was stunned. What could she possibly do about the CEO's brother's problems? If something happened, she wasn't supposed to fix it. Just keep him away from the press. If he appeared on social media, the company's stock would plummet, and the family would become the center of every scandal. Jin Seoryung didn't see it as too much to ask. Seo Yujin really shouldn't have been that surprised. The conditions were unusual. What kind of man needed this much supervision? Yujin thought there had to be people way more qualified for a job like this. The CEO tried to explain delicately. She knew her brother wasn't the type to beat women or children, at least not yet. Maybe this was how they'd come to this day, that money. It felt more like shame than payment. She had to meet him, but Yujin didn't even know what he looked like. The CEO assured her she'd recognize him instantly. You'll know him when you see him. But the girl wasn't so sure she trusted such a vague statement. Things could go wrong. She tried to find the manager's number, but it wasn't working. The noise around her made it hard to focus. Because of her father's debt, she'd never had a full-time job, but she'd gained one useful skill that always helped her. Her biggest weapon was simple. She always told the truth. Even when people didn't like her for it, she believed it was the right thing to do. The moment of truth had finally come, and her instincts were screaming louder than ever. A cold wave of fear washed over her. She didn't have to wait long. The first thing that caught her eye was a guy. Handsome, but with a heavy, almost suffocating aura around him. He walked right up to her and called her by name. She instantly knew she shouldn't get involved with this man standing before her. But she forced a smile and replied that yes, he wasn't mistaken. It really was her. She greeted him politely, already knowing from the start that his name was Jin Tae-yo, and said it was nice to meet him. The secretary added that the car was waiting in the parking lot and offered to show him the way. But Tae-yo wasn't even listening. He brushed past her, clearly intending to leave. Seo Yujin tried to stop him, asking him to follow her. Inwardly, she was sure of one thing, that this man was strange. There was something dangerous about him. She asked if he'd chosen a place to stay, wondering where they should head. Tae-yo muttered something about going to the Central Hotel. She got the message. The rest of the ride was silent. She had no idea what to talk about with him. Tae-yo was the one to break the silence, asking if she'd been sent by his sister, the one who always had to keep everything under control. Yujin didn't even know what to say. She wasn't sure if she should answer at all. Jin Seoryung hadn't given her any clear instructions. All the CEO had said was that her younger brother was coming home after a long absence and felt uncomfortable, especially after serving in the military for so long. He probably assumed she was just some assistant assigned to take care of all his errands. But then he shot her a suspicious look and asked if she'd heard that he doesn't hit women or kids. It was so until 3 years ago. Encounters with women hiding guns under their skirts and children carrying bombs in fruit baskets had changed the way he saw the world. Nothing in this world came for free, but Yujin had been blinded by money. Tae-yo asked for her opinion, giving her that same unsettling look again. It felt terrifying, like her life was in his hands and he was deciding what to do with it. The look in his eyes was that of a wild predator deciding whether to kill or not. And so the next 3 months would reveal everything, whether this beast could be tamed or whether she could survive beside him. Seo Yujin and Tae-yo had already arrived at the Central Hotel, the place he'd chosen to stay. As they entered the main lobby, they saw a man rushing forward to greet Jin Tae-yo with obvious joy. Even though it had been years since they'd last seen each other, the man recognized him instantly, but still asked to make sure. Was it really him, the young master who'd served in the military? Kim Il-deok, the hotel's manager, came closer, asking when Tae-yo had returned and complaining that no one had told him. He would have given him a proper welcome. Tae-yo was just as surprised that manager Kim was still working at the hotel after all this time. Yujin was quietly amazed by their easy conversation. The manager smiled, admitting he'd already reached retirement age last year, but he was genuinely happy to still be working. Even my mother wouldn't forgive me if I pretended not to recognize you because of old age, the manager joked lightly. Then he asked how long Tae-yo planned to stay this time, unaware that he had already been discharged from the military. When he found out, the manager was genuinely happy to hear that Tae-yo was finally returning to normal civilian life. The guy asked manager Kim to prepare a room for him, saying he'd be staying there for a while. The manager promised to arrange everything and offered him his usual suite. While Yujin watched their conversation, trying to keep up with what was happening, something unexpected suddenly caught her attention again. A loud, arrogant man was making a huge scene at the front desk because the receptionist didn't know who he was and, in his opinion, wasn't treating him properly. He shouted that he'd invested a fortune into this hotel and demanded to know how she dared speak to him like that. He didn't want to hear any excuses, just yelled for the manager to be called immediately. The manager quickly appeared at the reception desk, clearly intent on diffusing the situation fast. Yujin wasn't even surprised. The world was full of liars. She silently wished the manager good luck. The manager politely asked the man how he could help. The man snapped back with loaded questions. Was he really the manager? Did he even know who he was talking to? Then barked an order to prepare the most expensive suite on the top floor. Kim Il-deok apologized politely, but explained that the suite was already booked. He offered him a luxury room on the first floor instead. The man thought the manager was either mocking him or too old to hear properly. He repeated again that he wanted the top floor and the best room. To Yujin, it all looked like a one-man circus. But deep down, she felt like she'd seen this face somewhere before. The manager remained calm and patient. He said they'd arrange another excellent room for him and offer their best wine as an apology. The man got even angrier, grabbed the manager by the collar, and shouted that he wasn't some beggar who needed free wine. All he wanted was the top floor suite. Yujin could hardly listen to this nonsense any longer, but she didn't know how to stop it. And watching Tayo, she could tell he was about to snap. When she finally raised her voice, the man froze, but didn't even bother to look at her. His gaze was like that of a wild beast who'd smelled blood and wasn't about to back down from the hunt. But Yujin remembered the CEO's warning clearly. Her brother must never end up in the press. She realized the situation was critical, too dangerous, but she had to do her job. Keep Tayo out of trouble. She needed to stop this. Why are you ignoring me? Can't you even do your job? The man snapped, still furious. Then he noticed someone challenging him from the sidelines and got even more irritated. His eyes landed on Tayo, who stood calm but stared at him with a deadly serious look. The man couldn't back down now. If he did, he'd look like a fool. He had to get what he wanted from the manager. Yujin quietly took out her phone, hit record, and gave the man a polite smile. She asked sweetly if she could ask him a few questions. Tayo was surprised by her move, but didn't stop her. He was curious to see how this would play out. The man, already furious, snapped, "Who the hell are you?" Yujin didn't flinch and calmly asked, "Aren't you Director Lee Jung-jin from Hank Corporation?" The man confirmed her guess. Yes, he was the director, but had no idea what she wanted from him. The girl calmly warned him she was recording their conversation, then introduced herself as reporter Kim Ji-young from the Everyday News. What a lucky coincidence to meet him at this very hotel. Not too long ago, the second generation of conglomerates had been on trial after a drug scandal. The article about it had been weak, but who would have thought that today she'd get the chance to interview him in person? The man grew noticeably nervous and angry, demanding that she move the phone away from him. But she told him to just ignore it. They could keep talking as if the phone wasn't even there. Just think about it. He was still on probation. Yujin continued her conversation with the unpredictable man. The woman standing nearby couldn't take it anymore. She'd had enough and walked away. The man decided to follow her, still yelling that everyone had made a huge mistake today. He'd spent a fortune on this hotel and hoped the devil would take them all. The manager and the receptionist finally let out a breath of relief. Yujin couldn't believe she'd actually managed to calm that crazy man down. At last, she could exhale. She'd been worried her plan was too simple and never expected it to work so fast. Tayo shot her a sharp look and told her never to interfere in situations like that without his permission. He hated when anyone got in his way. Yujin didn't care. She was going to do it anyway. It was her job and she was paid well for it. He didn't care what kind of job she had, but warned her not to annoy him again. Otherwise, there would be serious consequences. She already guessed what those consequences could be. But even so, she couldn't allow herself to neglect her duties. The manager apologized for interrupting their conversation, but politely offered to escort them upstairs. Tayo didn't say a word. He just turned around and followed the manager. Yujin stood there, unsure what to do next. Her heart was pounding like crazy. She'd never been this exhausted in her life. It was already late at night when Yujin finally got home. All she wanted was to rest. Without even changing, she collapsed face first onto her bed and didn't move an inch. She couldn't understand why this day felt so long. Tayo was already getting on her nerves to the point where she wanted to punch him, but one thought kept her calm. Her bed was so soft, and she'd missed it all day. But the same old problem was still there: money. It was hard, but she had to push through for her own future. Just 3 months of babysitting the son of a third-generation chaebol, and she'd earn 100 million won. It wasn't an easy job, but how could she turn down such an offer? 3 months wasn't that long. She just needed to prepare herself to ignore her client's unpredictable behavior. Seo Yujin was born into a loving family, but they were never well off. She'd always dreamed of having enough money to buy anything she wanted. No matter how much she worked, her father's debt was massive, and everything she earned went toward paying it off. Her mother spent days and nights washing dishes at restaurants, but the pay was so small they barely got by. Yujin had to juggle school and part-time jobs with no time to rest. They'd gone through a lot together, but the debt never got smaller. 3 months of this job would let her pay off 10% of her father's debt. She couldn't afford to lose this opportunity. Earning that much money, honestly, was impossible. When the CEO offered Yujin this job, she accepted without a second thought, even knowing how difficult it would be for her. She didn't even realize how fast she fell asleep. It felt like she'd just closed her eyes, and it was already time to go to work again. Greeting everyone with a warm good morning, Secretary Seo started her new workday. Jin Seoryong asked how her brother Taeo behaved the night before, but Yujin said nothing special happened. The CEO then asked if she planned to check Taeo's room to make sure everything was okay. But there were already rumors that last night he'd caused trouble in the hotel lobby. Seoryong was probably talking about the argument that broke out when Yujin stepped in to help the manager get rid of an unruly guest. Yujin stood in front of the door, breathing heavily. She had never been this nervous before. Her entire paycheck depended on this guy. 3 months, she thought bitterly, still waiting for Taeo to open the door. What a great joke. And this was just her first day on the job. Taeo had made a scene in the hotel lobby last night. He probably went down to drink to adjust to the time difference. She assumed he'd gotten into a fight with a drunk guest. The man had started it, there were plenty of witnesses, and they'd managed to cover everything up. 12 weeks until the end of this assignment. But why wasn't he opening the door? She didn't get it. Anyway, Taeo's suite had plenty of rooms. The CEO's words kept echoing in her head. If she agreed to monitor him 24/7, she'd get an extra 10 million won each month. Yujin had always learned to adapt and obey her superiors. She knew exactly whose pocket her salary came from. She had to do whatever it took this time too, but she also needed to let off steam. She felt like screaming for Taeo to open the damn door already. He'd been doing whatever he wanted while she wasn't around. Now she had to keep an eye on him 24/7. She shouted through the door, telling him to stop pretending he wasn't inside. She didn't even notice the hotel staff member approaching her, who informed her that the guest from this room had gone to the gym and was now in the cafe on the second floor. That explained why no one answered. The staff member asked her to keep quiet so as not to disturb other guests. Yujin hurried to the cafe, where Taeo was supposed to be after his workout. She spotted him sitting by the window, sipping his coffee. Across from him sat manager Kim, who told Taeo he'd prepared everything he'd asked for and to let him know if he needed anything else. When the manager saw Yujin, he said he had to go. On his way out, he greeted her, and she smiled back. Yujin walked up to Taeo's table and sat down across from him. She wished him a good morning and said she was glad to see him safe and sound. Did he really enjoy making people chase him around while he calmly sipped his coffee alone? Yujin finally asked him to at least inform her if he planned to go somewhere. She'd been waiting outside his room for ages. Taeo didn't think he owed her any explanations. If she was supposed to watch him, then she'd better be by his side all the time. In his eyes, they weren't close enough for him to share his plans with her. Even though the girl was furious, she tried to smile and keep the conversation going. She mentioned that she'd heard he had a little incident last night. Taeo didn't consider it an incident, just a minor misunderstanding. And he had no intention of talking about it, especially not with Yujin. Because of what happened, she'd now have to stay by his side 24/7. That was Jin Soryong's order, and she was sure he wouldn't argue with that. Thanks to him, Yujin was staying overnight in a hotel room for the very first time. But Taeo wanted to remind her of something. Whether she remembered what he told her last night. Taeo couldn't stand anyone meddling in his business, and if she still wanted to be around him 24/7, she'd have to stay invisible. Taeo knew very well that Yujin desperately needed the money, so she'd better do her job without bothering anyone. Yujin tried to explain that if it weren't for the money, she wouldn't be here at all. But for her, it wasn't easy to live without causing trouble. That whole incident happened when she wasn't around. She didn't like it either, and he should keep that in mind. She couldn't imagine who in their right mind would willingly clean up someone else's mess. The CEO Jin kept saying it wasn't mandatory, but she knew very well that Yoojin wouldn't refuse that kind of money. How could an ordinary office employee like her not obey an order from the company's CEO? She wasn't thrilled about the situation either, and Tayo needed to understand that. The man was surprised to hear she was getting paid for this. He hadn't expected his sister to go that far, spending so much out of her own pocket. Yoojin couldn't understand why he thought she'd just follow him around for free, without any reward. Her services were paid for, at least as long as she didn't mess up. But with his behavior, that could happen any minute, and then she'd be in big trouble. Despite everything, she was starting to think the amount the CEO offered her was way too small. It wouldn't hurt to ask for hazard pay on top of it. Tayo suddenly wanted Yoojin to prove to him why he even needed her services, and why he couldn't do without her. She was genuinely stunned. His demand was ridiculous, and she wasn't planning to prove anything to him. He wanted her to give him a reason why he should keep her around, waiting for her to prove her usefulness. Even though Yoojin knew this was nonsense, she still had to agree. Tayo made it clear he wasn't generous enough to keep useless people close to him. She had expected this, but still couldn't wrap her head around why her life had to be this hard and complicated. When she entered Tayo's room, she was shocked. It was huge and stunning. She couldn't help but ask how much he paid per night for such a luxurious room. He didn't understand why she cared. She'd never be able to afford a suite like his anyway. Yoojin figured she might as well say something nice. Surprisingly, in black, he looked like a Grim Reaper. Tayo didn't get her compliment or why she made that comparison. Yoojin hurried to explain that she hadn't meant anything bad. He suggested she just blame it on nerves and forget what she'd said. Then he tried to leave again, making her wonder where he was going. He said he wanted to visit one square shopping mall. After being away for so long, that's where he wanted to go first. Tayo and malls didn't really match, but since it was a workday, the parking lot was nearly empty. He didn't want to explain anything in detail, just said he needed to get to the 4th floor. But there were plenty of spots on the 2nd floor too. If he kept making things this complicated, life in Korea would be pretty hard for him. Tayo didn't like repeating himself. He added that it had to be Zone C, and told her to confirm whether she understood or needed him to repeat it. Yoojin did exactly as Tayo told her. At first, everything seemed fine, not even a hint of him being annoyed. But he walked so fast that Yoojin couldn't keep up. She kept calling out for him to wait. She apologized, but he was 188 centimeters and she was only 165 centimeters. With that kind of height difference, their walking speed was nowhere near the same. Since they'd be together everywhere, she asked him to at least slow down a little. Tayo didn't care whether she kept up or not. If she couldn't, that was her problem. All she had to do was push the button and quietly follow him. Was he a germaphobe or something? Afraid of catching something by touching buttons himself? Maybe this was part of his ridiculous usefulness test, making her silently press elevator buttons. She asked out of pure curiosity. After all, he could have pressed the button himself. It's not like he had broken fingers. His training at IDT was brutal. Weeks without sleep, endless intense drills. Yoojin noticed how suddenly serious his expression had become, unlike anything she'd seen before. Tayo told her how they trained in swamps and swam in seawater. They often didn't even get the chance to shower or wash their clothes. That was quite a long answer, but at least it confirmed he wasn't a germaphobe. She wanted him to wait because she didn't understand why he was testing her or trying to prove she was useless to him. He told her to prove why he needed her services, but honestly, she had no idea how to do that. Aside from driving or pressing elevator buttons, he couldn't imagine what else she could possibly do for him. She might think he was a jerk, but one day he'd regret it. The day she'd make him kneel. He sped up again and Yoojin struggled to keep up. It made her even angrier. As they walked down the hallway, Tayo noticed a security camera pointed straight at him. He even wondered where Yoojin had gone. So the camera would record them together. Tayo walked fast and Yoojin barely kept up, practically running through the crowd to avoid losing him. When she finally almost caught up, she tried to ask where he was going, but he didn't answer. She grew more and more irritated. Seriously, how hard was it to answer a simple question? Or was he just ignoring her on purpose, testing her patience? She noticed he kept looking around, but she couldn't figure out what exactly he was searching for. Yujin had no choice but to follow him. Maybe things would become clearer a little later. When the man suddenly stopped and glanced around again, Yujin asked what he was looking for and offered to help. He kept shifting his gaze, ceiling, walls, then ceiling again. What exactly was he trying to find, and could he at least tell her? Earlier, he'd said she could prove she was useful. Yujin felt confident she could help. After all, she once managed to find a lost cat. Tayo finally turned to her, but the way he looked at her made her uncomfortable. He asked her to imagine being a 20-year-old girl. Yujin almost laughed. She actually was around that age. She'd turn 30 next year, but technically, she was still in her 20s. Tayo stayed silent for a couple of minutes, then stated firmly that Yujin had been at this mall on Saturday. She'd parked her car in the underground parking lot, 4th floor, Zone C. Then she got into the elevator and calmly went up to the 1st floor. As usual, she looked composed and focused on her own business. After that, she disappeared into thin air. Her car sat in the parking lot for almost a week. During that time, she never showed up on either the 1st or the 4th floor. Yujin asked what she'd been wearing that day when she first appeared at the mall. The girl understood there had never been anything between Tayo and that girl, but she couldn't figure out what exactly he was trying to prove. He stood there silently, as if piecing together a logical chain of thoughts to lead him to the right conclusion. He needed to calm down and think. Most likely, the girl had planned to meet someone at the mall and had been in a hurry. The meeting spot was probably the restaurant area on the 6th floor. It was always quieter there, perfect for private conversations. But why did she get off on the 1st floor instead of going up to the 6th? Did she change her mind? No. It was much simpler. She had just arrived early. She probably wandered around the mall first, slowly making her way up the escalators to the 6th floor. For most girls, that was normal behavior. Surrounded by dozens of boutiques, they usually couldn't resist buying something. The reason Yujin asked about her outfit was simple. She believed that girl was meeting up with a man. Dinner and a movie. The classic date combo. And the mall even had rooftop parking. If the guy was also driving and they left in his car, it made perfect sense why she never came back to the underground lot. Yujin herself wouldn't have done that. Parking there was way too expensive. Tayo pointed out that if there'd been something on the 1st floor she'd wanted to see, Yujin's guess might actually make sense. It annoyed him to see Yujin trailing after him like a clueless goldfish, doing whatever nonsense he demanded. Though deep down, he figured she might still be useful. Yujin didn't like being called a clueless goldfish. He didn't know who she really was, and that ticked her off. While talking to Tayo, Yujin noticed other women glancing his way. Clearly, they found him handsome. She silently agreed he was attractive. But after spending just a little time with him, she realized his complicated personality made him nearly impossible to deal with. His difficult character and rude manners completely erased whatever charm his looks gave him. Appearances can be deceiving. Those strangers who admired his face had no clue about the jerk hiding beneath it. Lost in thought, Yujin didn't even notice when Tayo suddenly walked off again. Without saying a word, she had to run to catch up. There were lots of blind spots in the surveillance system. That's why they couldn't get a perfect picture of what happened. Tayo didn't expect to find many witnesses either. Payments were electronic now, and weekends were crowded. People rarely remembered details. While they were standing in the parking lot, thinking through the girl's actions, they didn't even notice a car speeding toward them. Yujin panicked. For some reason, she froze and couldn't move. The car whooshed past at high speed, the wind forcefully pushing her to the side. The driver raced out of the parking lot without even slowing down at the turns. Yujin was furious. She couldn't believe idiots like that were allowed to drive cars. But then she looked at Tayo and was stunned. Someone had almost died right next to him, and he didn't even flinch. Tayo ignored her again, still thinking about the situation with that girl. He decided to check the exit, while Yujin was supposed to head to the car. They'd meet at the main gate. She was pissed. She wasn't his servant, and she didn't have to follow his every order. She grumbled to herself. 8,001 for 40 minutes? That wasn't parking. That was daylight robbery. Could she at least expense it? As she drove out of the parking lot, Yujin spotted the car that had sped past her earlier. Could it really be the same jerk from the rooftop? She hated people like him. He didn't care about anyone else or what people thought of him. Oddly enough, the man was calm and collected, even though just a few minutes ago, he'd almost hit someone. Then she noticed Tayo waiting for her near the parking gate, standing not far from that jerk. The man, without even looking around, flicked his cigarette butt. and missed his target. Yujin froze. She knew exactly what kind of temper Tayo had, and he definitely wouldn't like this. The cigarette butt floated toward him slowly, and Yujin prayed it wouldn't actually hit Tayo. It nearly did. If it had, things could have ended very badly. She tried to stop it with the sheer power of her thoughts, fully aware of how ugly this could get for that jerk. Tayo stopped. At first, he looked completely calm, but in his eyes, a plan was already forming. A plan to punish this jerk. There was no way he could just walk away. With a temper like his, he simply couldn't let it slide. Yujin was surprised when Tayo bent down, trying to pick up the cigarette butt from the ground. She couldn't even imagine why he was doing that. Tayo picked it up, and by then he already knew exactly what he was going to do with it to teach that jerk a lesson. Yujin didn't understand why. Out of the entire planet, that cigarette butt had to land right on Tayo at the worst possible time. One look at his face told her trouble was coming. She instantly decided she needed to stop him. The stranger noticed Tayo pick up the cigarette butt. Crossing his arms, he asked sarcastically what Tayo planned to do with it. The man didn't say a single word. Without even looking at the jerk, he just tossed the butt straight into the guy's car. The jerk went ballistic, yelling at him, asking if he had any idea how much that car cost. Tayo kept his cool and calmly replied, asking if the guy even knew what a trash can was, and that cigarette butts belonged there, not on the street. The jerk shouted even louder, calling Tayo a crazy freak. Watching from a distance, Yujin thought that this jerk had no idea who he was dealing with. With insults still flying out of his mouth, the man lunged at Tayo with his fists, not realizing what kind of trouble he'd just gotten himself into. Yujin already had a pretty good idea how this would end, and honestly, she was more worried for the jerk, because with his arrogance, he might really get hurt. Tayo had served in the military for a long time. His reflexes were flawless, and dodging a sloppy punch like that was no problem. He grabbed the guy's arm in an instant and twisted it behind his back, making the jerk cry out from the pain, struggling to break free. Holding him firmly, Tayo used his other hand to grab his head and slammed him down onto the hood of the car. The jerk screamed at Tayo to let him go while he was still being nice. But Tayo ignored him, replying only that he'd better never piss him off again. The pain was so intense that the man was sure his arm was about to snap. He couldn't take it anymore. Finally, he came to his senses and apologized to Tayo, swearing it would never happen again and that he understood everything now. Tayo was no longer interested in teaching the guy a lesson. He let him go, and the jerk practically fell headfirst into the car. Tayo was confident this kind of lesson would stick, and that the jerk would think twice before littering again. Yujin was relieved the whole scene was finally over. She was more than happy to see Tayo get into her car safe and sound. She asked if he ever thought about how weird it was to act like that in broad daylight. Though to be honest, it was kind of satisfying to watch. Guys like that jerk sometimes needed a wake-up call. She said it, but then regretted it. It felt like she was encouraging Tayo's aggressive behavior, and she didn't want him to think that kind of thing was normal. In general, she told him not to draw too much attention to himself, though she didn't actually say straight out to stay out of trouble. Yujin hoped the rest of the day would go smoothly. There was nothing else planned, so they headed back to the hotel. She'd said earlier she'd be watching him closely from now on. But right now, she needed to stop by home to grab some things so she could stay at the hotel later. She hadn't even finished speaking when Tayo got out of the car, like always, not bothering to listen to her to the end. Yujin tried yelling after him, but the unruly guy didn't even turn his head. She kept shouting anyway, hoping he'd at least hear her. She warned him not to cause trouble and to stay calm, because once he lost control, stopping him would be almost impossible. She didn't want him eating dinner without her. She wanted to bring him something tasty, so she asked him to wait for her at the hotel. Yujin returned to the hotel just as the sun was going down. She dragged behind her a small suitcase with almost all her essentials packed inside. The loud rattling of the cheap suitcase annoyed her, but it was all she had. She hadn't used it in ages. She came back later than planned, thanks to her mom. An hour earlier, her mom wouldn't let her leave, not understanding what kind of job required moving somewhere else. She was worried Yujin had gotten involved in some financial scam and was lying about it. But there was a surprise waiting for Yujin at the hotel, something she definitely didn't expect. Her CEO was there, greeting her warmly and inviting her to sit on the couch next to her. Jin Seoryong immediately noticed the branded fried chicken bag in Yujin's hands and realized she must have gotten pretty close with Tayo. Yujin felt like the CEO misunderstood, but she asked why the woman came to the hotel. Was it to visit her brother? Soryong thought what Yujin said earlier was absurd, since she had no interest in seeing him at all. Yujin couldn't understand why the CEO thought she and Tayo were suddenly so close. The woman explained she happened to be near the hotel and just wanted to see Yujin. Then, for some reason, she casually asked why Tayo had returned to Korea, pretending she wasn't actually curious. There had to be a solid reason for his return, so she decided to ask Yujin. Maybe Tayo had told her something. Did she really think Yujin was the kind of person Tayo would spill everything to? He didn't even tell his family anything, and he'd just met her last night. The CEO realized her mistake and apologized. Yujin wasn't sure whether to speak or not, but she had a feeling Tayo was looking for someone. Jin Seoryung was surprised. Her brother? Looking for someone? She suddenly got curious who it could be. Yujin didn't know, but then remembered she had a few questions of her own. She pulled a receipt from her pocket and asked if the company could cover the expenses. The CEO looked closely at the receipt. Her face changed immediately. She seemed lost for words. Yujin smiled to herself. What had she even expected? They'd already raised her salary sky high. Of course, there wouldn't be extra money for that. The CEO sighed, clearly upset she hadn't thought of this earlier. She pulled a credit card from her wallet and handed it to Yujin. It was the CEO's credit card. Yujin could use it to cover expenses whenever she needed. It wasn't a company card, so she could use it freely whenever necessary. But this black card was a luxury unlimited credit line in South Korea, and when the girl saw it, she froze for a moment. Jin Seoryung said it was fine. She could just think of it as part of the company's planned expenses, like buying snacks for the staff. Yujin asked if she could use the card to buy coffee at a nearby cafe, and the woman confirmed it. Even if one cup cost over 10,000 won, she could buy it. Did Yujin really think the CEO couldn't afford something that small for her dear secretary Seo? Yujin was happy and grateful when the woman told her she could drink as much coffee as she wanted. 10, even 20 cups a day. Honestly, Yujin had been planning to ask for extra pay for the dangers of the job and possible medical costs, but now she didn't have to worry about that anymore. If everything went well, the CEO would cover both the hazard pay and medical expenses, so Yujin had no reason to stress. The girl promised she'd give her all for the company, but the CEO didn't quite get what she meant. She worried that her brother might actually return only her bones. With that, Jin Seoryung suggested ending their conversation. She told Yujin not to tell Tayo that she had been at the hotel, hoping they had a clear understanding. She also asked Yujin to remind her brother to visit home in the next few days. He'd completely forgotten. He hadn't shown up to see her or their parents since coming back to Korea. Their father was furious about it. Yujin didn't know how she'd deliver the message, but she promised she would. The girl held the black card tightly in her hands, knowing it would make her feel safe just having it with her. She understood that generosity usually came with big resources. Only the rich could afford to act this relaxed. Or maybe it was something else. It felt like she'd just received a real treasure. Something powerful. By the way, she really did remember that Jin Tayo had come straight to the hotel from the airport without visiting his family. Who could be the person he was looking for? Someone more important than visiting his own parents first. His words at the mall were strange too, when he asked her to imagine being a 20-year-old girl. He'd been asking about a girl in her 20s. Maybe he was searching for someone he had once loved and been separated from. Yujin stepped into Tayo's room and loudly announced that she was back. She wasn't even surprised to see Tayo sitting at his desk, staring at his computer, not even acknowledging her osatsiyos. She asked him what he was working on, but she didn't really expect a reply anymore. She was used to talking to a wall. As she came closer, she saw that Tayo was watching security camera footage from the shopping mall. The man was surprised she told him not to have dinner, but then showed up with chicken. Yujin teased him, asking if he had a problem with it. Was he looking down on chicken? It was incredibly generous of her to buy him something she could only afford on payday. She opened the box and offered Tayo a taste before judging. Tayo decided to try the chicken since he was starving, and to his surprise, it wasn't as bad as he imagined. Yujin tried to get him to talk, joking that everyone who'd lived abroad always missed Korean fried chicken. Tayo asked if the girl had ever been abroad. She admitted she hadn't. She'd spent most of her life working to pay off her father's debts, never having enough for travel. The chicken was delicious, and they ate it quickly. They hadn't eaten all day. Yujin wanted Tayo to hear her out because not just she, but many others, thought he was way too harsh. Plus, he didn't share a single drumstick and ate them all. Tayo asked if she didn't like the chicken breast she'd been enjoying so much. Yujin said no. She always saved the best for last, which is why she started with the breast. Tayo, on the other hand, was the type who ate the best part first and then everything else. Yujin was disappointed she didn't get a drumstick she loved so much, but next time she'd keep that in mind. If it weren't for the CEO's card, she might have smacked him and happily gotten fired. But not tonight. Tonight she was feeling too generous. When she tried asking Tayo if he'd learned anything new about that girl, he scolded her. Hadn't she ever been taught not to talk with her mouth full? She wondered how someone with such perfect manners could eat all the drumsticks without even offering one to the person next to him. After finishing their meal, they went back to the computer to keep watching the mall's security footage. Looking at the monitor, Yujin asked again if Tayo had found the car and what had happened to it. He stayed silent, annoyed that she was sticking her nose into his business. Her presence was starting to irritate him. The footage quality was awful, and it was hard to identify people's faces clearly. But Tayo had another angle. The man's face was still blurry, but the girl's was visible. She was the one he was looking for. The footage showed a 20-year-old girl getting into a car's passenger seat. Clearly, she wasn't alone. From her calm expression and behavior, it was obvious she got into the car willingly. If you looked closer, you could tell the car was a rental. But Yujin had no idea who the girl was. Tayo needed to test Yujin's analytical skills again. Maybe she could help him. He decided to tell her who the girl was. Her name was Lee Jongyong, a college student who'd gone missing a week ago. When her parents started searching, they found her car in the mall's parking lot. The last time anyone saw her was when she got out of the elevator on the first floor. It just so happened Tayo returned to Korea at the same time. Since he knew her father, the man asked him to help find his daughter. They hadn't filed a police report, which was strange, but it was their right. Tayo explained that they didn't want to risk making things worse. But Yujin didn't understand. If someone's missing and you don't go to the police, it looks suspicious. The footage clearly showed no crime was committed. Lee Jongyong willingly got into that car. From that moment on, the police had no reason to investigate further. Seo Yujin listened to the man carefully and came to the conclusion that this girl didn't seem to be someone close to him. Then she noticed he suddenly intended to go somewhere, even though he hadn't planned anything earlier. Curious, she asked where he was going since she was supposed to follow him everywhere. Tayo replied he was going out for dinner because half a chicken wasn't enough to fill anyone up and keep the hunger away. Yujin was stunned. He'd eaten almost the entire chicken himself since she couldn't even finish her half. Finally, Yujin made it to her hotel room. She didn't want to do anything else, just crawl into bed and rest. She lay down quickly, but couldn't fall asleep because she was so thirsty. She had simply overeaten too much today. Even though she was exhausted, her thirst was stronger, so she decided to get up and find some water. She remembered there was still a bottle of water in the fridge, but she'd have to stop by the store tomorrow to buy more. As she passed through the living room, she nearly screamed from shock. Tayo was sitting silently on the couch in complete darkness. He sat there staring at a single spot, a drink in his hand. When she gasped and shouted, he didn't even flinch. He just sat there, motionless. Yujin caught herself thinking how good he looked sitting there, so calm and completely at ease. She slapped her cheek slightly, trying to shake the thought off. She needed to get a grip. But what was he even doing there at this hour? She briefly thought about pretending she hadn't seen anything. It felt like he was asleep sitting up, yet somehow still fully alert. No wonder he looked so serious. Like he was replaying everything that happened today and making plans for tomorrow. Out of nowhere, he asked why she couldn't sleep either. But he still didn't turn his head toward her. He couldn't sleep because he spent almost the entire day training. Only then would he allow himself 3 to 4 hours of rest. It was the only way he ever got any sleep. She'd heard that people who struggle with sleep are often more sensitive to their surroundings. Maybe that's why he had such a guarded, tense personality. Even several hours of morning training weren't enough to wear him out. The man finally turned his head and looked at Yujin, who stood before him in her not-so-flattering pajamas. She was amazed by how he always seemed to sense the exact moment to look at her, as if he could read her mind. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. They stared at each other but didn't know what to say. Yujin walked over to the window and was struck by how beautiful the city looked from the skyscraper's height. She'd never seen anything like it before. It was already deep into the night, but plenty of people were still awake. Korea was unusually quiet. The faint hum of passing cars and motorcycles was barely audible. Somewhere outside, cats meowed and drunk men brawled. But those sounds were just part of normal city life. Even the sound of the wind was muffled by the soundproof walls, which made the silence feel almost suffocating. When Tayo called Korea quiet, Yujin was surprised. Just how intense had the place he came from been, if the silence felt foreign to him? He stared out the window, lost in thoughts about some place that clearly wasn't this quiet. It must have been incredibly hard for him to return from the army to civilian life without carrying heavy scars. Yujin could only guess what kind of sounds he was used to hearing at night. She couldn't even imagine how he truly felt. Gunfire, explosions, constant danger, those things harden people, make them colder, and strip away compassion. Still thirsty, Yujin finally walked to the fridge to pour herself a glass of water. It was strange. She was so tired from the day, yet she couldn't fall asleep. She decided to make Tayo some tea, believing it worked better than alcohol when it came to sleepless nights. Tayo knew very well this wasn't ordinary insomnia, and tea wouldn't help. Yujin didn't quite understand what he meant. If he couldn't sleep, wasn't that insomnia? Either way, if he drank the tea and fell asleep, maybe he'd at least start to believe it wasn't so bad. If he didn't like tea, there were always medications. She asked if he had ever tried solving the problem with pills. He calmly asked her where she thought he had been all this time. She should have guessed. She'd been observing him all day. "What do you think would have happened if I'd been drugged up and didn't notice the enemy approaching?" he said. Yujin didn't want to hear any more. She said goodnight and headed to her bed. He frowned, frustrated that Yujin didn't want to hear the rest of his story. Was she really not curious at all? When the girl disappeared into her room, Tayo stayed on the couch, glass of liquor in hand, staring out at the night city. Thinking about Yujin, he realized she was a funny, annoying little thing who somehow managed to get under his skin with her bold attitude. The next day, Yujin was amazed by how beautiful this place was. She hadn't been here in years. She asked Tayo if he knew she had graduated from this very college. The place hadn't changed at all since then. She remembered everything Tayo had told her on the way to the college and tried to follow his instructions. Still, she insisted he at least explain the details to her a little more. Tayo didn't think it was necessary. She just needed to do exactly as he said. She began to wonder if he might have been a commanding officer in the army. He didn't think she'd remember everything at once, so he repeated what he'd said in the car. She needed to get information from Lee Jong-young's friends, just like he'd told her before, and make sure they didn't know about her disappearance. Yujin reassured him. She'd been in the drama club for 3 years in high school. In drama club, she had been a promising talent and often played key supporting roles. When Tayo asked what role she played, she smiled and said, "A mandarin tree." She believed that the size of the role didn't matter, only the talent to play it well. And honestly, that little moment in her life was something she remembered most fondly. When the college girls noticed Tayo, they were immediately intrigued. They wondered who he was. Could he be a senior? They thought he was handsome and wanted to get to know him better. Yujin noticed the girls' interest in Tayo, but couldn't understand it. They had such bright futures, but apparently no sense of taste. Tayo asked if Yujin had learned anything about Lee Jong-young. She had met all of her close friends, but didn't hear a single thing about a boyfriend. There wasn't even the slightest hint that she had one. But they did say she'd started acting strange about a month ago. She was always busy or doing something, constantly glued to her phone during lectures. Even the professors began scolding her for it. Tayo took note of the fact that all these changes began exactly a month ago. And then Tayo had to take a look at what Yujin was showing him on her phone. She checked whether Jonghyun had a social media account, since almost everyone does these days. Yujin noticed that Lee Jonghyun used to post videos and photos of herself playing the piano or performing on stage. But about a month ago, the tone of her posts changed drastically. She started posting pictures of what and where she ate. There were also a lot of movie ticket photos. She was going to the cinema nearly every weekend. By analyzing all of her posts, it was easy to conclude she had been going on dates. Tayo scrolled through Lee Jonghyun's social media page, wanting to make sure the information could actually help them. He then said they should head back to the car. But Yujin couldn't hold back her curiosity and asked where they were going next. As always, Tayo was brief. He just said they were going home to analyze the information they'd gathered. But first, Tayo decided to stop by his parents' house to visit them. Since he hadn't seen them once since returning to Korea, When Yujin arrived at the house, she was pleasantly surprised. She noticed the parking area was even bigger than her own home. She might have been just an escort, but seriously, why did he ask her to wait in the car? He could be eating for an hour or two, and she wasn't planning on having a full dinner anyway, so why couldn't she just go with him? She figured she should at least ask when he'd be back so she wouldn't sit in the car all that time. Maybe this was her chance to use the director's black card. Yujin was surprised when she saw the CEO's car arriving at the house as well. The girl stepped out of the car and went over to Jin Soryung to greet her. The woman was surprised too. She definitely didn't expect to see Secretary Seo here. She asked if her brother had actually decided to visit their parents' house. When she asked how long ago Tae-oh had gone inside, Yujin said it had been almost 30 minutes. Seoryung was disappointed. She thought he'd picked a terrible time to visit. She didn't want Yujin just standing in the parking lot, so she invited her to come inside. The girl didn't really see why she needed to be there for a family conversation, but maybe her presence could help keep emotions in check. Was Yujin really here not to have dinner with them? Why did she suddenly decide to leave so soon? Tae-oh finally met his sister and tried to explain he came only to say hello. The CEO was surprised. After all this time, he couldn't even stay for a family dinner? Did he not realize how much that would hurt their parents? Tae-oh tried to explain that he simply didn't have time for family gatherings right now. He was too busy. But once he had time, he promised he would have dinner with them. Brother and sister hadn't seen each other for so long that they didn't even know what to talk about. Still, both tried, though it didn't go very well. Tae-oh advised his sister to pay more attention to their father's health. His blood pressure had risen even more since their last meeting. She needed to make sure he saw a doctor. She was surprised that Tae-oh was lecturing her about it, knowing full well it was partly his fault their father's health had gotten worse. Tae-oh said goodbye to his sister and quickly headed to the car. Yujin smiled and waved goodbye to the director as well. Jin Soryung stood in the parking lot, watching the car drive away. She realized her brother hadn't changed at all, still acting like a total jerk. Now it was time to get back to the case they hadn't been able to solve yet. Thanks to their persistence, they'd finally found something that might help locate the missing girl. They never imagined they'd get their hands on those transaction records, so they were thrilled. It was a big win to find Lee Jong-young's credit card history. It revealed where she'd been over the past week. There were transactions at the cafeteria, cafes, and some online purchases. Yujin noted her lifestyle had been pretty consistent. But a month ago, something changed. Suddenly, there were transactions at a department store, a nail salon, and an auto repair shop. Since even her friends didn't know she had a boyfriend, it was likely he didn't go to the same college. If she met him at one of those three places, the department store or the auto shop seemed far more likely than the nail salon. Tae-oh decided they should check the auto shop first. Yujin was to review the transactions from the 3 days following her visit there. Yujin was puzzled. Why 3 days? What could have happened in that time? It turned out she'd gone back to the same auto shop, but this time she'd spent very little. Her social media posts started to shift around that same time, which was odd since she'd never had these kinds of expenses before. There were plenty of restaurant and cafe photos, but no matching transactions. A guy might pay once or twice, but covering every single check? That stood out. So the logical conclusion was that this guy was putting in effort, trying to impress her. Exactly. Lee Jong-young's boyfriend clearly wanted to look good in her eyes. If he could afford to pay for her, that likely meant he was an office worker, but didn't have his own car. If he did have a car, she wouldn't have needed to drive to the mall herself. On top of that, he'd rented a car. He probably should have just told her he'd be driving too. Tae-oh fully agreed with Yujin's conclusions, and she was genuinely proud to prove how smart and useful she could be to him. Tae-oh decided to head out again. Yujin guessed he was hungry and wanted dinner. He invited her to come along, joking that he'd let her magical fingers push the elevator buttons. Evening had fallen once again, and the city lights shone even brighter than the night before. Tae-oh walked into the living room to sit quietly and look at the night city through the window, but then he noticed something moving on the couch. He immediately realized that Yujin must have made herself comfortable on the couch for the night, but still asked why she decided to sleep here of all places. Yujin hadn't expected him to return so soon, so she chose the couch because it felt the most comfortable to her. Dressed in a bathrobe, Tae-oh looked completely different, softer and less strict than he usually did in his regular clothes. He asked why she gave up her perfectly cozy bed to sleep in the living room. Yujin didn't know what to say at first, but then explained that it was too quiet in her room and she couldn't fall asleep. Could it really be that she found an alternative to her magical bed and chose this couch and the noise from the street? Yujin got up from the couch and noticed he was drinking alcohol again. She wanted to remind him that she'd already told him to drink tea instead. When she was a child, her parents used to tell her that chamomile tea helped with insomnia, and they always drank it together. After making Tayo a big cup of tea, Yujin lay back down on the couch, wished for a quiet night, turned to the other side, and tried to fall asleep. She must have been exhausted and comforted by not being alone. She fell asleep fast. Tayo sat on the opposite couch, watching how sweetly Yujin slept, and even felt a little jealous of how easily she could do it. He spent almost the entire night in the living room, waiting until the sun started to rise. But he didn't feel sleepy at all. Yujin woke up in the morning, not expecting to see Tayo nearby. She stretched sweetly. She'd slept peacefully and well. As she stretched, she didn't even notice Tayo walking toward her from another room. It felt like he hadn't slept at all. He asked how she slept and how she was feeling. Now she could compare which was better, her bed or the living room couch. But his face didn't look like someone who actually cared about how she slept. To look the way Tayo did now, he definitely needed more than just a couple hours of sleep. But for the first time in a while, he'd actually slept deeply and felt rested. Yujin curiously asked where exactly he'd slept. Where else could he have slept but his own room? Did she really think he'd sneak around in the middle of the night just to find another place to sleep? Yujin thought he was lying. He'd once said he couldn't sleep well because it was too quiet and he had to sleep on the couch. She couldn't believe he actually slept in his comfy bed. Apparently, she was the only one with sensitive sleep. Tayo noticed just how soundly she slept. She didn't even wake up when he went to and returned from training. But Yujin's neck and shoulders were sore from sleeping on the couch. Tayo asked if she wanted to join him for breakfast or had changed her mind. Yujin was starving, so of course she agreed. Besides, her job was to keep an eye on him. Skipping wasn't an option. According to their plan, today they were going to visit the auto shop that Lee Jong-young had supposedly gone to. At the shop, a mechanic greeted them and asked how he could help. Yujin pointed to her car and said she wanted to get the oil changed. The mechanic was surprised. He could tell right away she had a luxury car. She clarified that the car was indeed nice, but unfortunately, it belonged to the company she worked for. He smiled, said it would only take a minute, and quickly started changing the oil. The girl mentioned that she'd seen a young guy working there before, but he didn't seem to be around today. Without stopping his work, the mechanic asked if she meant Mr. Young. Yujin smiled. Yes, that must have been his name. He'd promised to give her perfect service next time, but he wasn't there today. The mechanic said the guy hadn't shown up for about 10 days. He hadn't had time to find a replacement yet and was pretty annoyed about the sudden resignation. Yujin remarked that it must be tough working alone. The mechanic admitted he'd asked the guy to stay longer, but Jung just hung up coldly. He had been a good worker and great with customers, too. Yujin did her best to distract the mechanic so Tayo could look around the shop more carefully. But she didn't understand why he was taking so long. If they got caught, they wouldn't be able to get more information. The mechanic noticed it looked like Yujin had changed the oil not too long ago. She pretended not to know anything about it. She claimed that couldn't be true since the car had been making noises every time she stopped. She asked him to check it more thoroughly. Maybe the problem wasn't the oil after all, the mechanic thought, deciding to take a closer look. Plus, she looked like someone who could pay well. Tayo was rummaging in one place for quite a while. Yujin figured he must have found something interesting. She didn't get how he could just search through someone else's workspace without permission and act like it was perfectly normal. If it weren't for her distraction skills, they'd definitely have been caught. But Tayo didn't respond or thank her. The girl realized he was ignoring her again, but didn't make a big deal out of it. Tayo walked ahead and finally stopped, saying this was the place they needed. According to the service center's records, their guy, Young In-ho, lived in this building. But they couldn't just barge into his home like that. They needed a believable reason to visit. Yujin thought maybe Lee Jong-young had willingly gotten into his car. Maybe they'd run away for love. Who was she to interfere in someone's relationship? Tayo didn't care about her principles or whether there was love involved. He was just doing the job he was hired to do. So he told her to forget everything she'd just said and focus on the mission. Seo Yujin, the promising drama club talent, Tayo said with heavy irony. Something in his voice made her nervous. He told Yujin that today she'd play a leading role. She hadn't been ready for that, but she had no choice. She asked what exactly she needed to do. She'd have to use her acting skills and make it convincing. There wouldn't be a second chance. His words genuinely scared her. She understood that one wrong move could cost them a lot. Plan A was to break down the front door, and Plan B was to use a rope, climb down from the roof, and enter through the balcony. Plan C was to use her acting skills to make him open the door himself. Yujin couldn't believe that in such a short time, this crazy guy had come up with 3 completely absurd plans. But he was genuinely waiting for her decision. The final call was hers. He didn't care what she chose. His goal was simply to get into Young's apartment. Yujin leaned more toward Plan C, though she could avoid direct participation. Plan B sounded tempting too, but it was too risky and harsh. She knew he would be less tense in front of a woman. But first, she had to admit to him that she had never really been the promising talent of the drama club. But he ignored her again and headed straight for the apartment they needed. At the door, Teo pulled a pair of dark gloves from his pocket and put them on. Yujin didn't understand why he needed gloves. They were counting on him opening the door voluntarily, relying only on her talent. Teo explained that the situation could get complicated if his fingerprints were found, which could bring trouble with the police. But why didn't he think about her? She could leave fingerprints too, and then the trouble could fall on her. He reassured her that wearing gloves would actually look suspicious for her, so it was better he wore them. Gathering her courage, Yujin finally knocked on the door. She didn't even notice her hand trembling slightly. She pulled her blouse sleeve over her hand, better safe than sorry, since her fingerprints could be left on the door. The apartment was empty. No one was there, and the lights were off. They hesitated, but had to step inside to make sure the place was really empty. Yujin didn't hear anyone and was convinced the apartment was empty, so technically they didn't need to go in. But Teo was sure he had seen a shadow on the balcony. He wanted Yujin to show off her outstanding skills she often bragged about. She was genuinely scared. She had no skills in deception or breaking into apartments, and her acting talent wouldn't help now. She tried knocking again, saying she was the downstairs neighbor and water was dripping from the ceiling. Maybe a pipe had burst. Could the apartment really be empty? If someone was deliberately ignoring her, she might have to call the police. After her words, they heard footsteps behind the door and waited for someone to answer. Yujin was genuinely terrified. She had no idea what she would do when the door opened. They heard a faint click, and the door creaked open. A young man peeked out, asking what they needed since nothing had happened in his apartment. The fact that the guy had ignored their knocks meant he either had something to hide or was really scared of something. When he peeked through the crack, Yujin immediately recognized him. It really was the guy from the resume they'd seen earlier. The girl had a great photographic memory, remembering everything down to the smallest detail. Apartment 301 in the Wuzheng district, everything matched. From the photos, this guy looked identical to the one peeking from his apartment. Young In-ho asked again why they needed anything and why they had been knocking so persistently. Nothing had happened in his apartment. Yujin continued playing the role of the neighbor, complaining that water was dripping from her ceiling and it looked really bad. She asked if he planned to do anything about it. The guy insisted it was impossible. It seemed like he didn't believe her at all, constantly denying any wrongdoing. She had to act very angry. She couldn't understand what he meant by impossible. She insisted there was a flood in her apartment and wondered if he was implying she was lying. Of course, he didn't want to accuse her, but he had no intention of letting her into his apartment either. He knew a lonely elderly couple lived below him, so he asked again, why was she deceiving him? Hearing this from Young, Yujin didn't know what to say next, so she had to improvise. She couldn't mess this up. She needed to strengthen her performance and fully commit to her role. She quickly came up with the idea that she was the couple's granddaughter. She had just come to stay a few days while looking for a job, but for now, that detail didn't matter. Why didn't he just come downstairs himself and see for himself if he didn't trust her words? That way no one could later claim they had nothing to do with it. Young said he'd fix everything and settle any inconvenience later, but right now he was way too busy to help. When Young In-ho tried to slam the door, the girl couldn't let him. The first thought that came to her mind was to jam her foot in the doorway. She'd seen this trick before. She screamed immediately because it hurt, realizing she might have overdone it and didn't know what to do next. When the guy said he'd go downstairs with her, he was really just trying to close the door to engage the crosslock. Yujin trusted him, expecting him to leave his apartment, but she never imagined he just wanted to slam the door in her face. Teo knew the trick well and quickly grabbed the door with his hand, stopping the guy from locking it. Young In-ho realized the girl at his door wasn't alone and tried to push the stranger away with force. But he failed. Tayo was way stronger. He opened the door fast and moved to enter the apartment. The guy shouted, "What the hell's going on? Who the hell are you to barge into my apartment like this?" Tayo punched him in the chest but kept a firm grip on his sweater to stop him from falling. Then, after hitting him again, Young flew across the room and crashed to the floor at the far end. Tayo told Yujin to lock the front door and the balcony window. She understood immediately and hurried to do it. First, she locked the front door with the heavy, sturdy lock. Then she ran to the balcony to secure the window, knowing the guy could try to escape any second. Young barely got back on his feet, still not understanding who they were or what they wanted from him. Tayo didn't bother with small talk. He had one question, the reason he was even in this apartment. "Where's Lee Jung-young?" Young In-ho pretended not to understand why he was being asked about this girl. He couldn't possibly know where she was. He, staying alert, grabbed a kitchen knife and threatened Tayo, saying, "Do you really think you'll leave this apartment alive after what you've done with your accomplice?" Tayo wasn't surprised. He was ready for this. All he cared about was keeping Yujin out of the fight. Knife threats didn't faze him. He still needed an answer and wasn't going anywhere without it. Yujin knew that if Young claimed he didn't know where Lee Jung-young was, it meant he must be familiar with her. Otherwise, the guy would have asked who this girl was and why Tayo was asking about her. Young In-ho's words had exposed him, confirming Tayo's suspicion that he was involved in her disappearance. As Tayo stepped closer, the guy waved the knife, warning he'd cut him if he came another step, but Tayo wasn't intimidated. Tayo knew exactly what to do. He stripped off his jacket and held it in front of him like a shield. Young In-ho continued threatening, insisting he wasn't joking. Tayo locked eyes with him, showing he was stronger and fearless despite the threats. Young got nervous, realizing this guy wasn't easily intimidated. Without hesitation, he lunged at Tayo, screaming and brandishing the knife. Dodging his clumsy knife swings wasn't hard. He clearly wasn't a pro. Tayo quickly wrapped Young's arms in his jacket, stopping him from swinging the knife further. Before he knew it, the guy's arms were trapped, and he couldn't do anything. Tayo elbowed him in the nose, disorienting him completely. Young slumped to the floor, blood gushing from his nose. He couldn't fight anymore. Tayo pinned him down, twisted his arm, and asked the same question one last time, demanding an answer. "Where is Lee Jung-young?" Young In-ho dodged the question again, asking why it concerned him. Tayo pressed his knee into Young's back, hearing bones crack. The guy screamed in pain but still refused to answer. Just then, Yujin rushed in, shouting for Tayo to stop immediately. Was he trying to kill him? Young hadn't come out despite all the noise, meaning Lee Jung-young might not even be there. Continuing this would make headlines. Yujin didn't think Tayo should go that far. It wouldn't help him. Tayo didn't plan to stop. He stepped on the guy's hand with his boot, pressing for the answer about the girl. Yujin couldn't watch anymore. She silently begged Buddha to show mercy and save them. She turned away and heard a strange sound through the closed door. Peeking through the glass, she couldn't believe her eyes. She'd never seen anything like it. She called Tayo over to look. There was no need for questions anymore. The answer was clear. Tayo didn't understand what the girl saw that required his attention. Could it be Lee Jung-young hiding in another room? Yujin was furious, calling Jung In-ho a monster and ready to deal with him herself. On the floor lay a girl, barely moving. Her hands and feet were tightly bound, and her mouth sealed with tape. For some reason, Tayo didn't rush, even though Yujin was calling him frantically. Judging by her expression, it was clear she was in shock from what she'd just seen. To make sure the guy didn't pose a threat, Tayo hit him hard on the head, knocking him unconscious. With him out of the way, he could finally go after Yujin and see with his own eyes what was happening in the other room. The girl stood in front of the door, unable to bring herself to open it. She was certain she'd see something she could never unsee. When she finally opened it, she barely noticed the girl lying on the floor of the empty room. She froze, unable to believe this was happening in real life. She had only ever seen something like this in movies. They called the girl's name to check if she was alive. She just croaked back, unable to respond properly because her mouth was taped shut. The best news at that moment, she was alive, even though she was exhausted and covered in bruises. Yujin was stunned. Could this guy who seemed so sweet at first glance really be a monster with maniacal tendencies? They needed to untie her hands and feet, but the bindings were tight, so they'd need a knife to speed things up. Yujin couldn't bear to watch. Tears filled her eyes and she could barely see what was in front of her. Finally, they managed to free her hands, but under the tape, they saw huge bruises covering her arms and legs. Tayo quickly lifted Lee Jong-young into his arms. They needed to get her out of that apartment fast and to a medical facility for treatment. As they were leaving Young's apartment, Yoojin asked what would happen to that idiot. They couldn't just leave him alone in the apartment. Tayo said he didn't necessarily need to do anything to him, but he was sure from this moment on, Young In-ho's life would become unbearable. Young came to, screaming after them that he had wanted to finish her off. But she kept crying about her family strangling her with pressure and complaining about her old father. So he had let her into his home and even cared for her for a while. The next moment, Yoojin spun around and kicked the bastard with all her might. She crossed her arms over her chest to resist the urge to beat him up and shouted, "How can someone like him talk about caring?" In her opinion, he deserved a good beating. Tayo froze with the girl in his arms. He hadn't expected this fragile and seemingly sweet girl to have so much strength and anger inside her. He even felt respect for her. They were rushing to the emergency center because they wanted to get Jong-young there as quickly as possible. It was clear she needed immediate medical attention. While the doctors were examining the girl, Yoojin and Tayo waited anxiously for the verdict on her condition. They noticed a man approaching them, looking deeply worried. It was Jong-young's father. Tayo had informed him about his daughter. Tayo greeted Jong-young's father with a formal military salute, but the man told him it wasn't necessary since Tayo was no longer in service and could relax a little. At first, Tayo didn't want to tell the whole story about his investigation, so he simply said that his daughter was inside the examination room. The man silently shook Jin Tayo's hand, unable to express the depth of his gratitude for saving his daughter's life. Jong-young's father entered the hospital room in heavy silence, not knowing what awaited him inside. Yoojin understood perfectly. This moment meant a lot to him. Since Jong-young was now safe under medical supervision and her father's care, it was time for them to return to the hotel and get some rest. Yoojin was completely exhausted, and as soon as she reached the hotel room, she collapsed onto the bed trying to fall asleep. The memories of everything that happened that day wouldn't let her rest, so she kept tossing and turning. There was one more thing keeping her awake, something that was seriously bothering her and making her anxious. Unable to stand it any longer, Yoojin sat up and finally decided to ask what Tayo's problem was, why he wouldn't just let her sleep. The man stayed completely calm and asked her whether she planned to do her job. Yoojin was confused. What job could he mean when it was already the middle of the night? Tayo didn't answer. He simply turned his gaze toward the couch in the shared room, wanting her to figure out what he meant on her own. Was he seriously suggesting that she should sleep on the couch so he could enjoy the comfort of the bed all to himself? He didn't see anything strange about it. After all, she had no idea how much a non-commissioned officer earned per month. Yoojin really didn't know, since she had never interacted with soldiers and that kind of information wasn't made public. A sergeant with 7 years of experience earned about 2.5 million won before taxes, sometimes even 3.5 million, depending on hazard pay. He was paid for missions involving rescuing hostages from hijacked ships, but even that amount didn't compare to the danger of the job. That's why Tayo asked how much his sister was paying Yoojin. Yoojin understood what he meant, but she couldn't reveal the details of her deal with his sister or their arrangement. At first, she didn't know what to say, but eventually replied that her pay was somewhat similar to his. Not specific, but enough for her. Tayo clarified that he wasn't talking about her company's salary, but about the money she earned for following him around like some clueless goldfish. At that moment, Yoojin considered Tayo her boss, and herself, his obedient subordinate. Maybe she wasn't a real soldier, but being around him felt like risking her life every second. Then she realized that her little joke didn't amuse Tayo at all, so she quickly changed her tone, saying that the couch would be just fine for her. If her back broke in half, she could always glue it back together later. No one would even notice. She offered Tayo some tea again, saying it was better than alcohol, even for people who didn't struggle with insomnia. Of course, he appreciated the gesture, but still held his glass of strong liquor. Old habits die hard. Yoojin lay down on the couch quickly, but she couldn't stop worrying about whether Lee Jong-young was really going to be okay. She thought again about that bastard and regretted not hitting him harder. Maybe then he'd finally understand what it's like to be on the receiving end. Tayo sat near the bed, watching Yoojin as she kept tossing and turning on the couch, unable to get comfortable. She asked him why he was staring at her like that. Wasn't he planning to go to his comfortable bed and finally rest? Maybe he didn't like her calling that creep a bastard, but she always spoke her mind. She didn't add a single word she didn't mean. He had no idea why Yoo-jin suddenly got angry. He hadn't said a word, let alone criticized her comments or behavior. That bastard had kidnapped a naive college girl and done disgusting things to her. As a normal person, that infuriated Yoo-jin. Tayo actually found it amusing that Yoo-jin spoke with such passion. It made him laugh. He reminded her that she wasn't the one who'd been kidnapped. She wanted him to explain what he meant because his vague remarks only irritated her more. Tayo explained that Yoo-jin didn't even know Lee Jung-young personally. She had known nothing about her before this incident. That was true, but people get angry not only about what happens to them personally, they also care about what happens around them. Of course, it would have hit harder if it happened to her, but she couldn't stay indifferent to others' pain. Like hearing news about a child murdered by their own parents without any sign of remorse. Or a report about a police officer who sacrificed his own life to save a stranger. She might not have known those people personally, but such stories always disturbed and saddened her. Tayo thought Yoo-jin didn't notice him quietly drinking again, but she pointed out once more that tea would help him sleep better. Yoo-jin suddenly wondered if Tayo's years in the army had made it hard for him to sleep peacefully. Maybe after so many years, he simply couldn't rest properly anymore. It seemed like he'd forgotten what real silence felt like. Tayo thought about it for a moment. He just needed time to adjust to normal city life and learn how to enjoy the quiet again. Yoo-jin called him Mr. Jin, curious about why he had chosen to become a soldier in the first place. When he looked at Yoo-jin, he realized she had made herself comfortable, ready to listen to the story of his military past. Did he really think that, in his place, Yoo-jin would have avoided such a harsh environment? Working in an underwater demolition team was anything but easy, especially for a third-generation chaebol. What if luck had turned its back on him and he'd met his death instead? Just imagine, dying without even spending all his money. That thought alone sounded terrifying. Tayo listened to Yoo-jin's long, boring lecture and finally asked if she ever planned to sleep. But when Yoo-jin tried to fall asleep, Tayo kept talking, saying that once a thought crossed his mind that he'd never considered before. Holding a glass filled with ice and alcohol, he believed that he'd be able to cool off his head if he overworked his body. Yoo-jin had once held a mistaken belief. She thought he'd joined the army just to legally beat people. Of course, she never said that out loud. She assumed he did it out of a sense of duty or honor, like some noble prince serving in the military. It was unusual to see a third-generation chaebol in an underwater demolition team. Compared to him, other soldiers' lives seemed almost like a fairy tale. Their conversation went on, but Tayo asked her once again if she was ever going to sleep. The morning turned out to be tough for Yoo-jin. It was safe to say it had been the worst night of her life. All she could think was how cruel Tayo was, a real sadist. He'd made her sleep on that horrible couch while he enjoyed the comfort of a soft bed. He had no sense of duty at all. What on earth had they taught him in the military? He clearly didn't know how to treat others. Leaving the room, Yoo-jin clutched her aching sides. When Tayo heard her muttering, he simply walked past without a glance. Was he really that cold and heartless? Completely lacking compassion even toward a woman? When they reached the elevator, Yoo-jin was pleasantly surprised to see Tayo actually reaching out to press the button himself. She hesitated, shocked. The man asked what she was waiting for. They needed to get going. What had happened to make him do it himself, she wondered. She couldn't believe her eyes. Tayo had truly pressed the elevator button with his own finger. Who would have thought that the same hands that had beaten people could look so beautiful? His rough fingers seemed like works of art. No wonder she wanted to prove her worth somehow. There weren't many other ways to do it. Yoo-jin had never imagined she'd live to see the day Tayo pressed an elevator button. She could almost die happy now. Of course, she didn't actually want to die. It was just a joke. She planned to live a long, happy life. But her words clearly made Tayo want to dissect her mentally. Realizing her joke had failed, Yoo-jin quickly tried to change the subject to avoid awkwardness. Their first plan for the day was simple. Grab a nice breakfast before heading out. When Yoo-jin opened the menu, she spotted her favorite dish, mango bingsu, the most delicious thing in the world. It was expensive, but worth every bite. That Korean dessert made of finely shaved ice just melted in her mouth. Tayo only ordered coffee, so Yoo-jin decided to offer him a bite. Maybe he wanted to try it. When he refused, she sighed in relief. More mango bingsu for her. Over breakfast, Yoo-jin asked what Tayo's plans were for the day, since she'd have to tag along everywhere. Fine, she thought. She was happy enough even if he didn't want to share his plans. Tayo calmly sipped his coffee, staying silent as always. Yujin kept trying to start a conversation, hoping to get at least something out of him. She joked about whether he'd really let her go after the 3 months were up. They made a good team. She was the brains, he was the brawn. She played the drama actress, he was the action star. Tayo asked if she hadn't risked her life just to get assigned to the planning department. But Yujin wasn't in a rush to climb the corporate ladder. Life was good when you lived it to the fullest and enjoyed every moment. Didn't she ever think that she was already living her best life now? But Yujin believed being right wasn't always necessary. Tayo teased her. Did she think he couldn't sleep without her? Yujin replied that thanks to her, he probably slept just fine these days. She really had helped him a lot with that past incident. He knew she was once part of a drama club, though she'd admitted she wasn't exactly a star performer. Anyway, Tayo needed a reliable driver, someone he knew well. When he asked if she really thought being his driver would pay a huge salary, Yujin couldn't even respond. Did she just want to make a lot of money without caring about the job? Why agree to something she clearly didn't like? Their conversation was interrupted when Yujin noticed Jonghyung's father behind her. Seeing them, he walked over to say hello. The first thing Yujin asked was how his daughter was doing. Even though she didn't know her personally, she genuinely worried about the poor girl. Thankfully, Lee Jonghyung was recovering, and the man expressed deep gratitude for their help. Yujin let out a relieved sigh. The man turned to Yujin, saying he'd heard she'd played an important role in saving his daughter. But Yujin didn't see herself as a hero. She hadn't done much. Even Tayo couldn't stay quiet. He said she'd done a lot. She brushed it off, saying it was just a drop in the ocean compared to what Tayo had accomplished. Still, she was secretly thrilled. It was his first compliment to her. Tayo said that breaking the kidnapper's nose had been the right move. She'd acted bravely despite the danger. Yujin didn't know what to say. She'd hit the guy mostly out of anger, but it worked. The man thanked her for it. He was especially grateful to Sergeant Tayo. He'd known that once the guy got involved, his daughter would be found. But if anyone was to blame, it was the father, for not watching over his daughter more closely. Tayo had just hoped to find her sooner. Thankfully, her injuries weren't as bad as he'd feared. He'd soon be able to take her home. As for the kidnapper, Korea followed the law and justice would be served. After that conversation, Tayo noticed the man looked troubled, deep in thought. He asked if everything was okay. The man said that if only he'd called the police sooner, when he found the car, or even earlier when his daughter didn't come home, things might have been different. Maybe then she wouldn't have suffered so much and could have come home much earlier. He turned to Tayo, who was ready to listen. Maybe there was still something he could do to help. There are many important things in life: fame, fortune, power, health, family, friends, even beliefs. But the key is to never lose sight of what truly matters. "Don't repeat my mistake," the man said. At first, Tayo didn't understand what he meant, but listened carefully. Maybe these words would help him someday. Thankfully, Lee Jonghyung was lucky. She had a father who, even if a little late, learned to put her above everything else. The pain she felt had been worse than a stray dog's bite, but she would recover, both body and mind. The man was surprised by Yujin's remark, but appreciated her sincerity. A stray dog's bite. That was harsh, but he didn't question her way of thinking. What happened was just an accident. He didn't blame his daughter at all. Then he turned to Tayo, curious how he was adjusting to civilian life. Knowing he had always lived as a soldier, he worried, but it seemed the young man was doing better than expected. Things weren't that bad, Tayo thought. After all, if he'd managed to avoid a court-martial for beating his commander, life couldn't be too terrible. Hearing that, Yujin froze in shock. Then again, knowing his temper, she wasn't entirely surprised. But why had he done it? Beating a commanding officer was a serious crime, one that could have easily landed him in prison. Could he really have beaten up his commander? What kind of person is he anyway? Yujin couldn't understand. Tayo tried to explain that the commander's incompetence nearly cost their troops their lives, and he just couldn't stand by and watch. The man believed Tayo was completely right, which was why they showed him leniency, suspending him instead of dishonorably discharging him. He'd also heard Tayo was on a 3-month probation and that the commander took quite a beating. Fortunately, that meant their troops were safe for 12 whole weeks. without that scoundrel around. It was time to wrap things up. He'd received a phone call earlier, but only a general instruction. The details would come by email. The man thought Tayo was the best fit for this mission despite repeated objections. He voted in his favor, hoping the young man understood what that meant. Yujin had no idea what they were talking about. She tried to analyze the whole conversation, but nothing made sense in her head. She wondered what kind of mission Tayo was supposedly suited for. Was it something important or dangerous again? The man stood up, saying Tayo had never disappointed him before, and he hoped he'd handle this job well too. He said it was a pleasure meeting Yujin and suggested they meet again sometime if the chance arose. He said goodbye to Yujin and Tayo and was about to leave when Yujin wished his daughter a speedy recovery. They decided to head back to their room and waited for the elevator. When they entered, they noticed another couple already inside, going up as well. When Yujin pressed the button for the 40th floor, she noticed the couple was headed to the 39th. They live on the 39th floor, Yujin thought? So, just one floor below us. Tayo stayed silent, occasionally glancing at the couple, a little suspiciously as if something was on his mind. The elevator doors opened on the 39th floor, and the couple started to exit. Yujin smiled warmly at the woman who looked her way. She noticed the woman drop something, but couldn't tell what it was right away. Yujin called out to them, asking them to wait. The couple looked confused. They didn't know her. Yujin picked up an earring from the floor and handed it to the woman, explaining she had dropped it. The woman looked surprised. It was a gift for her wedding anniversary. She was so grateful Yujin had noticed and returned it. Overjoyed, the woman hugged Yujin and thanked her. They wished each other luck and a wonderful evening. As the woman kept thanking her, Yujin smiled politely, happy she could help such a lovely person. While Yujin was saying goodbye, the elevator doors closed and Tayo went up to their floor, leaving her behind. Jin Tayo, that idiot! Yujin fumed. He just left me here without even saying a word. Was it really that hard to wait 10 seconds? Where are the ghosts when you actually need them to drag him away? As Yujin stood there fuming, the couple she'd helped earlier watched her with amused curiosity, listening to her creative string of insults. She eventually returned to the room alone. Tayo wasn't there, so she flopped down on the couch to rest for a bit. It felt strange to do nothing, and the longer she rested, the less she felt like doing anything at all. Then she heard Tayo return, surprisingly soon. The man asked what she was doing. Was this really the first time she wasn't bothering anyone and just lazing around? Without even sitting up, Yujin asked how many times a day he trained. To her, that level of discipline seemed almost pathological. Tayo thought maybe she should try a few exercises herself. Staying fit never hurts. Yujin refused, saying she was busy doing her own circulation exercises. She felt tightness in her chest and suspected her growing irritation might be a symptom of something serious, so she was doing her own version of therapy. Tayo didn't say anything, just gave a cocky smile and decided not to interrupt her healing routine. On TV, there was a report about Naval Commander Lee Byung-gun being appointed as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yujin perked up. Could it be the same commander? Maybe Tayo should hear this. It was only the second time in history that a naval officer had taken that role. The announcer called it a revolutionary break from military hierarchy. And that man was Lee Jong-young's father. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he now commanded the army, the navy, and everything else. Yujin was stunned. She thought he was just a regular officer. She had no idea he was such a high-ranking figure. She turned to Tayo, saying it was already dinner time. They should go eat. The man put aside his work, and they decided not to be late for dinner. When they entered the restaurant, Yujin noticed the same couple from the elevator sitting at one of the tables. It really was that same sweet woman. She recognized Yujin right away, and the girl couldn't help but greet her again. The lady invited Yujin and Tayo to join them for dinner so they could get to know each other better. While Yujin was thinking of a polite way to refuse, Tayo said yes immediately, agreeing with a straight face. Yujin stared at him in disbelief. She hadn't expected that at all. The lady still couldn't stop thanking Yujin for finding her earring. It meant a lot to her sentimentally. The man introduced himself as Samuel Britton, but said to just call him Sam. His wife was Emily Britton, or simply Emily as she insisted. Tayo introduced himself first. Surprisingly polite tonight, not his usual self at all. Yujin smiled and said her name was Crystal. She didn't even know why, it just slipped out. Tayo looked at her in surprise, but Yujin had no idea how to explain. He asked since when she'd changed her name to Crystal. Did she like it better than her real one? Yujin put on a mysterious face and said proudly that it was her English name. Tayo remembered her saying she had never traveled abroad, and that was true. He couldn't understand why she'd suddenly need an English name if she'd never used one before. Annoyed, Yujin snapped that you didn't have to go abroad to have an English name. Then she turned back to Emily and said, "Actually, I'm Seo Yujin, but you can just call me Yujin." The lady smiled and said it was lovely to meet such a charming young woman. Dinner was delicious, and the friendly conversation made the evening even better. Sam asked if they were dating. They looked so good together. Or maybe even married like him and Emily? Yujin froze. She didn't know how to respond or what to say. Just as she was about to clarify that they were just acquaintances, Tayo cut in and said, "We're dating." Yujin felt a strange mix of surprise and warmth, but also panic. She lightly kicked him under the table, whispering, "What are you talking about?" She couldn't understand why he was acting so weird tonight. She wondered why he said that. Could it be that he'd developed feelings she didn't even realize existed? But she was sure that couldn't be true. It was simply impossible. Sam reacted cheerfully to their answer. They reminded him of the good old days. Curious, he asked what exactly attracted him to Yujin. What was so special about her that made their relationship begin? Tayo wasn't prepared for that question, but his improvisation saved him. He said he liked it when she always had the last word. Yujin was annoyed. She didn't like that Tayo was saying such nonsense without even asking her opinion. She couldn't recall him ever liking when she had the last word. To keep the conversation going, Tayo asked Sam which country they were from. The woman explained that Sam had worked in a bank until he retired last year. This year, they decided to take a vacation trip for their 30th anniversary. Tayo thought this trip must be really special for them. He could hardly believe that at their age, they still enjoyed spending time together and traveling abroad. Watching Tayo, Yujin couldn't believe it. Was Mr. Jin always this polite? And she just never noticed? Dinner was pleasant, but something strange was happening with Yujin. She figured she probably had one drink too many and was a little tipsy. She didn't feel well and could barely keep up with Tayo, afraid of being left behind again like last time. Because of her intoxication, Yujin's legs felt heavy, stumbling over each other as she tried to stay upright. But she didn't manage to. She tripped and started falling right onto Tayo's back. He turned just in time, caught her in his arms, and saved her from hitting the floor. He asked if she was okay, but when she leaned against his chest, all she could notice was how unbuttoned his shirt was. She tried not to think about it and quickly moved her head away, turning to the side. But Tayo held her gently by the head, pulling her closer as if to show an elderly couple how lovingly he could hold her. Seeing that scene, the woman smiled. What a caring young man he was, and how sweet it looked from the outside. Standing in Tayo's arms, all Yujin could hear was the sound of his heartbeat. Fast, nervous. For some reason, it felt calming to her. She didn't even try to move away from his embrace. When they reached the 39th floor, Sam and his wife got ready to leave since they lived one floor below. Everyone had fun that evening and hoped to see each other again before the couple left the country. Yujin and Tayo stayed in each other's arms, and as Tayo wished them a good night, the elevator doors slowly closed. Once the doors shut, he instantly stepped back and acted as if nothing special had happened. When Yujin asked what that was all about, he pretended not to understand. But she meant, how long had he been in love with her? It was hard to believe. Even if he liked her, shouldn't he have told her before pretending they were a couple? First, confess your feelings. Then act. Tayo didn't answer, only asked, "Do you mean Samuel or Emily?" There was no point in pretending anymore. He must have had a reason for introducing them as lovers. Or maybe he really had fallen for her. Tayo looked at her seriously. Did she really think he was the type to fall in love at first sight? When he saw those people earlier that day, he acted terribly. Or rather, as he usually did. But in the restaurant, he was completely different. He couldn't understand what had come over him, or what he might have done wrong that upset her. Normally, Tayo wasn't the social type. He'd never agree to lunch with strangers, let alone introduce Yujin as his girlfriend. Then Yujin suddenly remembered the email. When Mr. Lee Byung-gun asked Tayo about a call, he said another message was supposed to arrive soon. After that, Tayo started acting strangely, and Yujin assumed it had something to do with that. She wondered what message he had received. Could Sam and Emily be hiding something? Did they do something wrong? Yujin suspected Tayo was keeping secrets from her. But she had to find out. She wanted to help him. Then she saw him smile and rubbed her eyes. It must have been her imagination. Tayo joked that Yujin probably thought of them as spies. She rolled her eyes. Another one of his ridiculous jokes. Those two didn't look like spies at all. Tayo asked what she thought spies looked like. Not everyone wore masks and carried guns after all. To Yujin, spies looked suspicious and overly clever, especially their eyes always scanning everything like they were gathering intel. But these people looked like ordinary tourists. There was no reason to accuse innocent people. Usher Patterson, born in 1962, 10 years in U.S. military intelligence, known for stealing classified secrets from multiple countries. Still, Yujin couldn't imagine what kind of secret information Sam could possibly steal from Korea. Tayo explained that after the U.S. lifted restrictions on Korean missile development, Korea could now build intercontinental and mid-range missiles. Naturally, others would want to know where Korean weapons technology was going. To China, Japan, the U.S., or somewhere else. Yujin realized how serious this was. Shouldn't Tayo arrest him immediately? But rash actions without proof could spark diplomatic trouble. They first needed to uncover what data leaked, and who the final traitor was. It was pointless to break a jar leaking from the inside. Time and patience were needed to find the truth. Of course, they had to be careful. That arrogant American fool had taken money for dirty work. She herself would never do something like that, no matter the reward. This time, a simple broken arms wouldn't be enough. Tayo noticed how fiercely Yujin reacted. She wasn't afraid of anything. But why would such a politically delicate and dangerous mission be assigned to Tayo specifically? Maybe because higher-ups needed a civilian to take the blame if things went wrong. Yujin wasn't far from the truth. She asked why he'd accept such a mission knowing the risks. Tayo saw that Yujin was upset and asked what exactly bothered her so much. Was he pretending to hate the world yet still let others treat him like a fool? And he was asking her why that annoyed her? That's exactly why he asked. Yujin wasn't his girlfriend, yet she worried and got angry like she was hoping for something more. Sure, she wasn't his girlfriend, but anyone in her place would be angry. It was dangerous and could cost someone their life. Tayo couldn't tell. Was she worried for him or for the fact that staying by his side put her in danger too? The look on Tayo's face made Yujin think he didn't understand her at all. So she asked about the rumor she'd heard, that he once hit his superior officer. Mr. Lee Byung-gun mentioned that Tayo had punched the superior after he nearly sent an entire squad to their deaths. Tayo didn't want to recall that incident, let alone explain it to a civilian girl who knew nothing about military life. Still, he tried to explain simply. There were plenty of idiots with inferiority complexes unfit to lead, but you meet them everywhere. He'd realized just how many fools exist in this world, especially in the army. Yujin remembered the law of weirdos. Wherever you go, they're always there. But the scariest part? If you don't see any weirdos around, it probably means you're the weirdo. Luckily, Tayo had plenty of them nearby, meaning he wasn't the strangest one around. Tayo raised an eyebrow. By her logic, one of them had to be the weirdo. If she said it wasn't him, then who was? Yujin smirked, saying she knew exactly who the weirdo was. Him, the crazy one. Looking at their interaction, they both acted weird, blamed each other, and tried to prove the opposite. For the second time, Yujin noticed Tayo smiling. Was he finally getting used to civilian life? Maybe even learning to express emotions? When he smiled, he looked completely different, like someone who hadn't killed countless people as a soldier. But how could he smile so sweetly now when he'd agreed to a mission that could cost both their lives? Even if he wasn't scared, for the first time Yujin wanted to quit everything. Even the money she'd planned to earn through him. The day started with breakfast, and Yujin, heading to the cafe, wanted to eat her favorite dish again. And why not do it today? Enjoying a mango bingsu and being happy all day, that was something she just couldn't give up. Unless something truly irreversible happened. Yujin thought that if she kept eating this expensive dessert every day until her contract ended, and paying with the black card, it would probably cost her an entire year's salary. She decided that from this moment on, she'd have one mango bingsu every single day. Even if she froze to death, she wouldn't give up this pleasure. Tayo looked at Yujin and said her acting club skills would soon come in handy, though she was still just a beginner. The girl sighed bitterly. Did he come up with something again? Would she have to improvise? even though she wasn't ready for it at all. Tayo had some business to take care of, and he needed Yujin's help. Right now, she could really assist him with something important. Even though she didn't want to, she gathered her courage and asked what exactly he needed her to do. When they entered the restaurant, Tayo pointed at a couple sitting at the table and told her that today she'd be working with them. From the outside, the couple looked so sweet. They didn't look like spies at all, contrary to what Tayo had told her. Her mission was to stall them for 15 minutes. All she had to do was make sure they didn't return to their hotel room. Yujin understood her task, but she wanted to know what Tayo would be doing in the meantime. Would he really leave her alone with them? The man looked at Yujin and asked if she really wanted to know what he'd be doing. She got the message and decided not to ask further. As he walked away, Yujin called after him that he had exactly 15 minutes, not a second more, so he'd better make it in time. Yujin thought that money was her greatest enemy. Because of it, she had to take risks and follow Tayo's every instruction. She gathered her courage, walked up to the suspicious couple, and called out to them. She noticed that Sam and his wife were already about to leave. She had to hurry. They were heading back to their room, and Sam completely agreed with his wife's suggestion. Emily was startled when Yujin suddenly jumped on her shoulder, shouting frantically, her face full of panic and worry. Yujin tried her best to squeeze out some tears, thinking to herself that Tayo really owed her big time for this. It was much harder than it looked. Meanwhile, Tayo had already met with the person who was supposed to help him. He asked Kim Il-deok which room Samuel and Emily Britton were staying in. The man replied, "Room." Tayo extended his hand, demanding the key to their room in a firm, commanding tone. "And don't tell them a thing," Tao added. The man hesitated, realizing he was about to commit an official offense. With a heavy heart, the man agreed to give Tayo the key, convincing himself it was for the good of public safety. Tayo assured him that this action was a matter of national security and thanked him for understanding. Mr. Kim handed him this key, warning Tayo to be careful, even though this wasn't part of his duties. Tayo entered the elevator and went up to the 40th floor. He had to make it look natural, to avoid suspicion. Then, using the key, he unlocked a stairway door that would take him down to the 39th floor. As he descended, he mentally prepared for the mission. He put on gloves. He couldn't afford to leave a single fingerprint behind. He was almost at their room but needed to make sure no one was on the floor. He couldn't risk being caught breaking in. He quickly unlocked the door, knowing he didn't have much time to find something useful. Once inside, he began carefully scanning the room. Anything suspicious had to be photographed or memorized. He only had 10 minutes left. First, he checked the bedroom. The couple's belongings were scattered all over the bed as if they had packed in a hurry. On the desk, Tayo spotted a notebook. He immediately went over to check all of Sam's notes. Nothing interesting. Not wanting to waste time, he moved on. Then he noticed a laptop. Surely there must be something valuable inside. But time was running out. Opening it, he realized it was password protected. He tried several combinations, but nothing worked. That's when his backup plan came in handy. The screwdriver he'd brought with him. Unscrewing the back panel, he used a knife to carefully remove the chip and memory unit. It seemed like he'd done it, but he had only a few seconds left to sneak out unseen and return to the restaurant. Yujin played her part perfectly, keeping Sam and his wife occupied. Emily asked her what happened and why she was crying. Yujin said she had heard it was their wedding anniversary this year, and asked how long they'd been married and whether they'd ever thought about divorce. Emily didn't want to talk. She assumed Yujin had just had a fight with her boyfriend, Tayo. If only it were just a fight, Yujin said bitterly. It's much worse than that. Her mother had warned her that people never change, but she didn't listen. Sam tried to comfort her, saying that arguments were normal for couples. They fought, made up, and fell in love again. But this wasn't just any fight. Their personalities were completely incompatible. Tayo thought being rich was the only thing that mattered. On top of that, Tayo wasn't very attentive. If she didn't speak first, he wouldn't even say a word. And that drove her insane. Lately, she hadn't been able to sleep well because of him, and every morning she looked exhausted, her face pale and weary. And when she complained about her back and neck hurting, he didn't even care to listen. Tayo was always full of energy. It just wasn't fair. The Britons listened carefully, shocked that such things were happening between them. They had thought the couple was happy. Then Sam suggested, "Why don't you just leave him?" Yujin thought about it. It sounded simple, but in reality, it wasn't. Still, she reminded herself, this job pays well. Yujin noticed the woman kept glancing around as if she was in a hurry, so she tried harder to hold her attention. Finally, Emily stood up, apologizing. They had plans to visit the museum, and their taxi was already waiting. They needed to get ready and leave. Yujin didn't know what to do. Teo still hadn't returned. What was taking him so long? She caught up with Sam and Emily near the elevator, asking if they could stay just a little longer, maybe have another drink and talk a bit more. When Yujin offered to pay, Sam seemed a little intrigued. The girl still had a lot more stories about Teo to tell. Yujin begged Emily to listen to her, saying she was going through a really hard time. But Emily was unmoved. She had already decided to leave. This is bad, Yujin thought. If they caught Teo in their room, things could go terribly wrong. She didn't even want to imagine how. Maybe she looked suspicious, because Sam and Emily were eyeing her like she was hiding something. If this kept up, Teo wouldn't just end up in the local news. He'd be all over the headlines. Yujin had no idea what to do. Her heart raced as the elevator doors opened. It was now or never. It would all be over if they caught Teo in their room. She felt like they kept staring at her, as if they suspected something. Yujin closed her eyes so she wouldn't have to see anything, bracing herself for the worst she could imagine. When the door opened, she saw Teo smiling, saying he had finally found her. He'd been looking all over the hotel. He looked as calm as ever, and from his expression, it was clear he had finished his work right on time. He apologized to Sam, saying it seemed Yujin had slightly interrupted them. Then he added that she could be a little persistent sometimes. It took time to listen to her. Sam smiled and said it was fine. Young lovers always had a lot to talk about. Times change, but some things never do. Emily wanted Teo to notice how sad Yujin looked. She advised him to be diligent not only at night, but also during the day. The elevator doors closed, and Sam and Emily went up to their room, leaving Teo and Yujin downstairs. The girl held herself together, but when the couple left, she collapsed to her knees. Finally, she could breathe and stop pretending to be a victim. Teo was pleased with how well she'd done her job. Yujin was pleasantly surprised. Had Jin Teo actually praised her? He'd never been good at showing emotion or gratitude. Watching her kneel before him, Teo reached out his hand to help her stand up. Seo Yujin couldn't believe her eyes. Did the sun rise from the west today? What had gotten into him? She couldn't deny she liked it. She accepted his help and thanked him for his thoughtfulness. She couldn't believe she'd lived to hear this beast-like man tell her she'd done a good job. He had finally acknowledged her, but Teo told her to keep her composure. Otherwise, she might ruin the mission. Yujin admitted her mistake and promised to be more restrained and keep her emotions in check. Later, sitting in the car, Teo grew angry. He couldn't understand why Yujin had only now told him that Sam and Emily went out. She apologized, saying she was so out of it. They had been waiting near the hotel for Sam and Emily for some time. Teo asked if she had overheard why they were leaving. The girl remembered Emily mentioning they'd called a taxi that would arrive soon, so they needed to hurry. Moments later, the taxi really did pull up in front of the hotel. The taxi stopped at the entrance. Someone was waiting for it. They assumed it was for Sam and his wife. When Sam and Emily exited the hotel, they got into the taxi, but where they were headed was unknown. Teo immediately ordered Yujin to follow them. She understood, but worried they might notice her. Since the target was in clear view, Yujin had to keep her distance and not get too close. If they followed too obviously, they'd be spotted right away. She had to think a few steps ahead, ready to switch lanes whenever necessary. Yujin recalled she'd never told him that back in college. She'd worked part-time. Once, she even tailed a couple having an affair and took pictures of them. She mentioned it so he wouldn't think she was a total amateur at tracking. Teo grew curious. Why had she worked so many part-time jobs? Was she planning to get rich and powerful? He was joking again. In reality, everything she earned went to paying off her father's debts. Teo hadn't known she had such heavy debts. Yujin clarified they weren't hers, but she was still responsible for them. If not for that, she wouldn't have been babysitting him. She added sarcastically that thanks to that debt, she'd had the honor of meeting him. Now she was basically a volunteer working for her country's good. Teo reminded her that her volunteer job actually paid much better than expected. Yujin didn't like him rubbing it in. Maybe it sounded strange, but did he really think it was easy to find someone as skilled as her? Most people specialized in one area. Versatile workers like her were rare. He thought it was rather impolite of her to brag like that. Yujin thought to herself that he'd better watch his back. One day, someone might stab him there. They'd been driving for a long time, starting to think the taxi would never stop. Finally, it arrived at its destination. Emily stepped out of the car, but they couldn't figure out where she was going. The only nearby place was a store. If they were sightseeing, they wouldn't split up. That would be strange. Yujin asked if she should follow Emily while Tayo kept an eye on Sam. Tayo thought for a moment, then decided they should keep following the taxi. Emily wouldn't get far. They were surprised when the taxi arrived at Hangang, the Citizen Central Park. It was a well-known dock area, but they had no idea what Sam was doing there. Was he planning to board a cruise ship? And why alone? Wasn't his wife joining him? Yujin immediately wondered if they'd have to follow him onto the cruise ship too. That was the last thing she wanted. She wasn't prepared for a trip. Once they boarded the ship, they had to find a good spot to discreetly watch Sam. Sam went inside and took a seat with a clear view. Tayo decided to stand by the door so he could hide quickly if needed. Suddenly, Yujin felt unwell and couldn't continue the surveillance. Tayo had suspected this might happen, so he was ready for any situation. Sometimes plans had to change. Yujin was in pain and wanted Tayo to notice and help her, but he just stood nearby, not realizing she needed care right now. All he said was that she shouldn't keep telling him no one more qualified existed than her. Yujin didn't care. She just wanted a sip of water. Tayo thought the girl was something else, but not exactly a real professional. After a few sips of water, she felt better. She could live again. But today had been a total waste of time. She thought they were going sightseeing, nothing more. After a moment of thought, Tayo asked if it was happening today. Yujin didn't understand what he meant, so she asked, 2 nights ago, data about a missile had been deleted from the defense agency's system. It was disguised as an external hack, but Tayo was certain the attack came from the inside. He figured the culprit would try to deliver the data as soon as possible. Keeping it would only make things worse. But Yujin knew that Sam had been in the hotel all day yesterday, under heavy surveillance, so the chance the informant came there was slim. Then it had to be today. But Sam hadn't met anyone. Maybe the meeting was set for tomorrow. They'd wait a bit longer. Meanwhile, Tayo decided to go train. Yujin didn't want him to go. As she'd said before, he was addicted to training. He asked why she thought that, but if she wanted him to stay, he could follow Emily's advice instead and train hard with the girl during the day. You could always train hard during the day to keep your mind off nonsense, and your body wouldn't ache. After all, that kind of thing could be done not only at night, and no one ever complained of sore backs or necks afterward. Yujin didn't like his jokes and shoved Tayo toward the door, urging him to just go train already. But Tayo was genuinely curious about what kind of intensive activity she thought he did at night. Yujin's phone buzzed with a message. Someone asked if she and Tayo were on a cruise together, and since when had they gotten so close? Jean Seoryong added that, for the record, she didn't approve of their relationship. Yujin should know she cared for her, and Tayo wasn't the right guy. The girl heard footsteps approaching, so she quickly ended the conversation with her CEO. She didn't understand what that was about, but one thing was certain. She definitely wasn't going to date him. The footsteps stopped by her door. Then there was silence. She was exhausted and just wanted to sleep. Yujin lay down on the couch and didn't even notice when she drifted into a deep sleep. The man stood outside her door. All he had to do was press the bell so she'd let him in. The sound was unbearable, the most annoying she'd ever heard, and he kept his finger on the bell for far too long. This is ridiculous, Yujin thought. She was too tired to get up. She'd thought Tayo went to train. Why was he back so soon? She silently begged him to let her sleep a bit longer, then reluctantly got to her feet to open the door. Yujin opened the door, saying, "What kind of training only lasts 10 minutes?" But then she froze in shock. What she saw didn't surprise her, but what she heard next did. A hotel employee was standing by the door, holding something in his hands. He handed Yujin a small box with medicine. Medicine? Yujin was puzzled. The employee explained that the man she had been with that morning had asked him to give her something for motion sickness. She really didn't expect that from Tayo. But the medicine would actually come in handy the next time she had to board a cruise ship. She repeated to herself several times that it was just motion sickness medicine, but she still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that Tayo had thought of it. After all, maybe he wasn't such a bad guy, though his military service must have messed him up, because they definitely don't teach that there. It was still early, but they had to be near the hotel already to keep watch and make sure they didn't miss when Sam or his wife went out. Waking up that early was tough, so while sitting on the bench, they didn't even feel like talking. They just watched from afar as Sam and Emily drank their morning coffee at the restaurant. It was a shame they couldn't hear what the two were talking about. Tayo, as always, was serious and focused. He tried not to get distracted so he wouldn't miss anything important. Yujin couldn't help but think that now, whenever she saw him, he bothered her even more. And there was nothing she could do about it. That morning, something happened that Yujin would remember for a long time. She knocked on the man's door to tell him he had a phone call. She figured if someone was calling him that early, it must be important. But when he opened the door, she froze and couldn't say a word. It was the first time she'd seen Tayo shirtless, and she was completely taken aback. Without clothes, he looked even more handsome, and she felt a bit embarrassed staring at him. He took the phone and answered the call right there, even though Yujin was standing beside him, unable to look away. She had no idea how to react. Seeing him like that, fresh out of the shower, left a mark she couldn't forget. She could tell even in the elevator, he really was a soldier, built to survive anything. But Tayo noticed her strange gaze and asked why she was looking at him like that. "Didn't you realize you were practically eating me up with your eyes?" he teased. Yujin didn't know what to say, though she thought to herself, "Not all of you, just your abs." Yujin figured there was no need to worry anymore, since after their last trip to Hangang, Sam hadn't left the hotel room. Maybe their meeting had already happened. Tayo didn't like that Yujin made such predictions. It wasn't her place to decide whether he had failed a mission or not. He assured her he had never failed a mission in his life, and this time would be no different, even if some girl kept doubting him. When Yujin said she completely agreed with him, Tayo got irritated and told her never to just agree with him. He hated that. While they watched, Yujin wanted to understand the terms of their contract. At first, it only described secretarial duties, but at what point did it go far beyond that? It might have looked like she was relaxing, but in reality, Yujin was in danger. Had she forgotten that she'd been bored in the hotel room for days, barely going out, and surviving on one mango bingsu a day? There was even a time when he personally drove the car while performing her duties. Maybe it wasn't her who had spent the whole day in bed, skipping breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just because she still felt sick from the last trip. Maybe her salary should be reduced because she hasn't been working as much as before. Yujin agreed. That had never happened before. The contract clearly stated she shouldn't talk too much, but follow his orders and requests. So now, she had to get back to her direct duties. She had to prepare the car immediately. They were heading out soon. Sam and Emily had finished breakfast, and a taxi was already waiting for them outside the hotel. They were definitely going somewhere. Once the couple got into the car, Tayo and Yujin followed them again. This time, they planned to act differently and hoped for better results. Yujin wanted to know if Sam and Emily were really a married couple, but Tayo didn't have enough info about Emily. She might have just been a civilian contact. Yujin thought Emily seemed to be the one controlling Sam. Could that really happen in an unmarried couple? She meant that it was worth thinking about. Emily always took the lead in their conversations, suggesting when and where they should eat or leave. Tayo found Yujin's words interesting and began to think, could it really be that Emily was the one in charge? It was easy to notice that Emily was going to the store alone today. Yujin was sure she wouldn't take Sam with her. Tayo asked Yujin's opinion. Did she think the room placement was important in this situation? Yujin couldn't understand what Tayo was getting at. Did he really think room placement mattered right now? It's easy to see how that works in society. The position of a desk or bed isn't just for looks. It can reflect someone's status or authority. For example, new employees get desks near the exit, while the higher-ups sit at the far end of the office where they can observe everyone, just like the CEO's office. Some people don't stand out. You only notice them when you pass someone else. It's a subtle way to show status and power. It was the same with them. Tayo's room was in the inner part of the suite, and her was near the door, reflecting their boss-employee dynamic. When Tayo visited their suite, Sam's room was next to the entrance, and Emily's was the farthest away. Yujin added that Tayo's room was bigger than hers. She wasn't complaining. Staying in a luxury suite was still nice. Tayo interrupted her thoughts before she could finish, almost shouting that it looked like he'd made his first mistake. If there really was a hierarchy between them, then Emily must have been above Sam in status. He was frustrated. He could have figured that out earlier and handled the whole operation differently. Now he was absolutely sure Emily was the one in charge of everything. She was probably the one managing all the deals. When Sam got out of the car, Tayo ordered Yujin to stay put and not make any sudden moves. Yujin stayed in the car, deep in thought, trying to make sense of what Tayo had just said and what he was leading up to. Meanwhile, Emily, like any normal woman, went into a fashion store. At first glance, nothing about her seemed suspicious. She approached a young clerk and asked if he spoke English, even just a little. When he said he understood a bit, she asked him about the quality of the clothes. Tayo watched her closely, trying to move closer to overhear their conversation. The clerk's face looked strangely familiar. He tried to remember where he'd seen him before. Then it hit him. The guy was one of the researchers from the list that had been emailed to him. His name was Baek Sunwoo. Emily thanked the clerk for his help and reached out to shake his hand. Tayo carefully watched her every move. He felt something important was about to happen. During the handshake, Tayo noticed the guy discreetly passing a flash drive to Emily. Tayo put on his gloves, thrilled that they'd finally caught them. It was time to act fast and finish the mission successfully. Emily was pleased with her interaction with Baek Sunwoo. Everything she had planned went smoothly without a single problem. Tayo waited patiently until Baek Sunwoo left the mall and got into his car. Nearby, Yujin was already waiting in her own vehicle. When the guy was just about to drive off, they had to block his way to stop him from leaving the parking lot. But for some reason, he wasn't in a hurry. He sat there with his eyes closed, so overwhelmed with anxiety that he nearly passed out. When he finally started the engine and tried to leave, Baek Sunwoo was convinced that everything was finally over. As soon as he tried to move forward, Yujin's car blocked his way, cutting off the exit. The guy didn't understand what was happening, but looked absolutely terrified. Why the hell was that car stopped in the middle of the road? Didn't the driver realize he was blocking the exit? It seemed like he wasn't planning to go anywhere. Baek Sunwoo got out of his car, apologized politely, and asked the driver to move so he could leave the parking lot. But suddenly, Tayo appeared. He shoved the guy back into the car and slammed the door hard against him. Baek Sunwoo had no idea what was going on, but the pain was sharp and real. He demanded to know what the stranger wanted and how he dared to attack someone in broad daylight. Calling Tayo a lunatic, the guy still couldn't figure out what he wanted. But when he noticed the gloves on Tayo's hands, he realized things were about to get really bad. Tayo received a phone call, some important news that confirmed his suspicions and helped him plan the next stage of the operation. He was told that the Britons had just received the laptop they ordered 2 days ago. Tayo was frustrated. He had tried to delay them, but things hadn't gone as planned. The mission had to be postponed. Yujin called Sam. He immediately asked what was wrong. She never called him. The girl explained she'd heard that he and his wife were planning to leave Korea tomorrow. They'd always been kind to her, so she thought it would be rude not to say goodbye. She'd love to see them tonight. Sam agreed and thanked her for caring. He promised that he and Emily would be there in 30 minutes. Tayo turned to Yujin and asked if she remembered what he had told her earlier. Now it was more important than ever. Yujin felt uneasy but replied that she remembered everything perfectly. Still, she hated seeing that strange man lying on the floor, bound hand and foot. Was all of this really because of that guy? Why make things so complicated just to sell out your own country? He only cared about himself. A real piece of trash. Soon, Yujin heard a knock at the door, and she immediately knew. It was Sam and his wife, Emily. Smiling, she opened the door to greet them, saying how happy she was they'd accepted her invitation. Sam didn't come empty-handed. He brought her a gift. Yujin pretended to be thrilled, insisting it wasn't necessary to go through the trouble. She invited them into the room, trying to recall Tayo's instructions. As soon as she escorted them inside, she was supposed to run, as far and as fast as possible. No matter what happened, she had to follow those orders. Otherwise, things could end badly for both him and her. Under no circumstances was she to let emotions get in the way or worry about him. She had to follow the plan exactly. No sudden moves. Tayo didn't want her hesitating or becoming a burden. He decided to make sure she truly understood. "I understand," she said, though she couldn't hide her emotions. Deep down, she knew he'd never truly worry about her. Tayo waited for a clear confirmation from Yujin. She assured him she understood and would follow his orders exactly. Yujin gestured toward the room, inviting the guests in. Though she was struggling inside, she forced a smile, hiding her anxiety. Sam and Emily politely thanked her for the invitation but asked if Tayo would be joining them for dinner. When they entered the room, they saw Baek Sunwoo lying on the floor and Tayo standing beside him. That's when they realized everything. Tayo smiled. "Welcome, Emily and Sam," he said. Or should I say, DIA's Natalie Rogers. The DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the U.S. Military Intelligence Organization. Natalie Rogers, Emily's real name. The woman immediately pulled out a gun and aimed it at Tayo. She demanded one thing. "Who the hell are you, Jin Tayo, and who do you really work for?" Tayo remained calm. As he'd said before, he was a nobody, just someone who cared about protecting his country. Emily shouted that she had warned Usher about him. From the start, the guy had seemed suspicious. Sam had lowered his guard, believing Tayo was just the hotel owner's son, never expecting things to turn out like this. Eugene tried to peek inside the room. Did they really not know Tayo had served in the army? That seems strange. Tayo didn't want to waste time with pointless talk. He needed one thing, the information his client was after. He asked directly where the data the guy had given them was stored. He knew their laptop had crashed, so they hadn't had the chance to send it yet. Sam realized Tayo must have been the one who broke their laptop. It made sense now why it suddenly stopped working. Emily blamed Usher, saying it was his fault. He was always careless at the end of a mission. But Sam disagreed, reminding her it was she who insisted they have dinner with them. Tayo told Emily to come closer. Judging by her age, he doubted she could hit him accurately from that distance. Outraged, she asked if he really thought she was an idiot. He'd just revealed where she came from. She was no rookie. Then she turned to Usher, asking for backup. Eugene secretly watched everything happening in the room. She couldn't imagine how she could possibly help Tayo. Tayo stood in the middle of the room while the furious woman kept him at gunpoint. She could shoot any second, and it would all be over for him. But Eugene had to obey his orders. Then again, if that woman actually shot him, there would be no one left to follow. After thinking for a moment, Eugene decided she had to do something. She slipped her hand into her pocket, searching for anything that could help, or at least give her an idea. What she found might actually work. No one would suspect what she was holding in her hand. She looked at Tayo, silently telling him she wouldn't abandon him. Tayo's eyes warned her not to interfere. It could cost her life. But Eugene chose to ignore his order and follow her instincts instead. She knew he wouldn't approve, but this was her only way to help. Emily had her back turned so Eugene could approach quietly, but she had to be careful not to startle her, or the woman might fire by accident. Eugene threw the keys into the next room to make it seem like someone was there, hoping to distract the woman. Just as Eugene expected, Emily turned toward the sound coming from the other room. Tayo quickly caught on to what Eugene was trying to do. He had to react fast based only on instinct and timing. Emily fired into the other room. The sound was deafening. Eugene ducked for cover, praying the woman wouldn't hit her. Then Emily turned back to Tayo, warning him that her next shot might not miss. And from what he'd seen, her aim was deadly accurate. But Tayo was already determined, so he immediately lunged at Emily, aiming to knock the gun out of her hands while she was distracted. He needed to make her lose balance, so he punched Emily, not caring at all that she was a woman. Sam saw Tayo hit Emily and quickly rushed to help her. Calling Tayo a freak, he jumped into the fight. Tayo noticed Sam approaching, so he quickly grabbed his gun and aimed it at him, warning him to stay still and make no sudden moves. Sam was furious. They hadn't expected their mission to end in such a disastrous way. But who knew it would work? The rule about not hitting women or children had been broken, and now they had to do exactly what Jin Tayo asked. Eugene tried to slip out of the room unnoticed, moving quietly to avoid drawing attention. She carefully closed the door behind her and hurried away. Time was short, so there was no room for emotions or hesitation. She ran faster than she had in a long time. She assumed nothing major would happen while she was gone, but she had to hurry. Running down the long corridor, she suddenly ran into them and was surprised. It all happened faster than she expected. Eugene immediately realized that Tayo had a solid chance to finish the mission successfully, without risking his life. Tayo kept Sam at gunpoint, determined to find out who had hired them, insisting they answer right now. Emily smiled at how cute the question was, one they hadn't even planned to answer. She was sure Tayo already knew. Tayo, however, was persistent. He didn't like repeating himself, but if necessary, he would keep going until he got the answer. It seemed they still didn't understand him, so he hid the gun behind his back and decided to explain everything in detail. He decided to deal with Sam first. Fighting a man was far more satisfying than a weak woman. Tayo understood Sam's intent, so Sam immediately lunged at him with fists. Though Sam was much older, he relied on his past training to give him an edge. Sam grabbed Tayo's legs, trying to pin him to the floor and stay on top. Tayo hadn't expected Sam to be that strong, so he didn't react in time to the attack. Before he knew it, Sam was on top and swinging a punch at him. Tayo grabbed Sam's arm firmly. Sam was really strong, and Tayo didn't try to go easy on him. Sitting on top, Sam tried to hit the guy in the face. Tayo focused on overpowering him, losing sight of Emily entirely. When he saw Emily approaching, it was too late to avoid her attack. She moved quickly and smashed a large flower vase on Tayo's head. The vase shattered, sending shards flying across the room. Emily was trying to help Sam, but even after the blow, Tayo held his ground, refusing to give in. Sam wasn't as young, and his endurance was lower than Tayo's. After a while, his strength waned, and he realized he had to act faster. Tayo despised people like Sam and Emily. If it were up to him, he'd destroy them to stop them from spreading harm and negativity. He considered them idiots who never understood the first time, forcing him to repeat himself many times. Tayo noticed Sam's hands starting to shake, so it was time to take control and switch positions. He grabbed Sam's head with his legs, immobilizing him and preventing any sudden moves. Tayo squeezed Sam's head so tightly it was hard for him to breathe. Sam coughed violently, but he didn't ease up. Emily realized Sam needed help and tried to approach Tayo, but he kept her at gunpoint, not letting her get close. He ordered her to stay still, warning he could shoot, and he was confident the shot would hit. Tayo had a head wound, blood streaming down his face. But he held Sam on one side and kept Emily at gunpoint on the other. Emily saw Sam suffering and yelled at Tayo to stop pressing him. Sam was completely exhausted, barely breathing. But to release him, Tayo required just one answer. But Sam stayed silent. Emily was furious, but Tayo asked again for their employer's name. She had to answer quickly, even though she didn't want to. Tayo laid out two options. If Emily gave the name, she'd live. If not, she'd face instant death. But Emily felt he should know that revealing their client meant quitting her service. Tayo thought she was already close to retirement, so losing her job was better than losing her life. All he wanted was to know who was after South Korea's military research. As expected, Emily was tough and had no intention of revealing names, even at gunpoint. The door opened and Yujin entered, asking Tayo if it was all over. She noticed the blood on his face and worried about his condition. His wound wasn't serious. Tayo asked Yujin if she had done what he asked earlier. When Yujin smiled, it meant she'd succeeded. She completed her task quickly and efficiently. Yujin held a flash drive and told Emily not to set her wedding date as the password on her laptop. Emily was furious. How could this insignificant girl have guessed her laptop password, especially since no one knew her wedding date? These were Tayo's instructions, which Yujin memorized carefully. First, she had to escort Emily and Sam to the room, then flee immediately. This showed that Tayo worried about her, insisting she avoid the room during the capture of dangerous criminals. Tayo didn't want her lingering and causing complications. After that, she needed to find the flash drive in Emily's room. That was the most important thing Yujin had to do, and she also brought in the guests who were looking for Tayo. Emily hadn't expected them to appear so quickly, and when she saw them, she realized it was over for them. Special forces had been notified about the dangerous criminals threatening their country with secret data leaks for profit. Yujin felt satisfied that she had contributed to this complex mission and helped defeat the criminal. Emily and her accomplices were under the special unit's watch, and it seemed it was all over for them. Emily still couldn't believe she hadn't realized right away that Tayo was actually a soldier, highly trained for operations like this. They put handcuffs on her, yet she kept threatening them, even though she knew there was nothing she could do. How could she have underestimated Tayo's ability to quickly figure out the real criminal and outsmart him? At first glance, it was clear Tayo and the soldiers were colleagues, so Yujin pointed them the way and even opened the door. Tayo looked at Yujin, wanting to make sure she was unharmed, since the criminals might have hurt her too. Yujin was busy looking for the flash drive, so she didn't have time to linger near the criminals. She was surprised by the sudden concern for her. She stood close to Tayo, but he was studying her carefully, as if inspecting her from head to toe. Yujin felt a little uneasy. Why was he looking at her like that? His gaze made her slightly embarrassed. She knew it wasn't the time to worry about herself. He was far worse off, so she needed to give him first aid quickly. The girl noticed that despite his injuries, Tayo acted like nothing happened, not even acknowledging the blood running down his face. The soldier smiled and said to Tayo that he was just like before. Yujin was surprised when the soldier called Tayo Hyungnim. Tayo smiled. Nobody had called him that in a long time, and it felt good to hear it again. The soldier smiled too, clearly happy to see Tayo and missing him. The man addressed Sergeant Kang Sang-yun, asking what he was doing here. Then he noticed the guy had very long hair. The sergeant had heard that Tayo had been discharged. He also knew civilians sometimes used brotherly terms socially. And the long hair? He'd grown it specifically for a recent special operation. When Tayo threw the gun to the sergeant, the guy panicked. He nearly got shot. As expected, the guy's skills hadn't diminished at all after leaving the service. But right now, Tayo was worried. They still hadn't revealed the client's name. Everything else could be handled by the soldiers. They could take over getting info from the criminals. Tayo wasn't okay with that. He barked at the sergeant to shut up and disappeared from sight. The soldiers didn't object, deciding to leave. They still had a lot to do. One soldier approached Tayo, saying he didn't expect to run into him here. He promised to come back later, since meeting Tayo was a dream of his. Then he also said that he was glad to meet Seo Yujin and called her sister-in-law. Yujin was surprised when she heard the word sister-in-law, having no idea why that guy called her like that. Did he really think she was dating Tayo? After everything, the maid was cleaning the room and Yujin wandered nearby, unsure how to spend her free time. She felt bad for knocking over a bottle. The maid didn't think it was a big deal, just warned her to be more careful. Yujin needed to talk to Tayo, so she went to his room and knocked on the door. She thought he should learn to answer when someone calls him, or maybe he was obsessed with a ghost who died from talking too much. She remembered him asking how she was doing, if she'd hurt herself anywhere. Sometimes he could be caring, but mostly he was unbearable. Sure, he was a jerk, but not enough to be haunted by ghosts. Without waiting for an answer, Yujin decided to enter Tayo's room. Opening the door, she saw he wasn't there. She wondered where he went. She was sure she'd seen him enter earlier. She got scared when Tayo suddenly appeared behind her, coming out of the bathroom. He wondered who allowed her to enter his room without permission, and then pretend to be scared when she saw him like that. Yujin didn't understand why he was always half-dressed whenever she entered. But looking closely, he really did look like a work of art. His sculpted, muscular body captivated Yujin. She couldn't look away. It felt unfair and cruel, using the situation when his body looked like a true sculpture. She also wouldn't want to wear clothes if she had a body like his. Yujin thought she'd show it off too, but wouldn't forbid others from looking. Tayo noticed Yujin staring again and asked why she wouldn't stop ogling him. She was staring at him again. The girl denied staring, and even if she did, she didn't see anything wrong with it. She wanted to treat Tayo's wounds, so she brought a first aid kit. She offered for him to sit on the couch without arguing. Tayo asked why she was doing this. He hadn't asked for it. In the army, he'd had many injuries and was used to ignoring them. Didn't he even notice the blood running down his head? He needed to clean the wounds and cover them with a bandage. She wondered why he was so stubborn. Was he afraid it would hurt? Why did she have to persuade him like a child? His stubbornness was incredible, even despite his injuries. Did he think she was doing it just because she cared? What if his wounds got infected? He could be unlucky and even end up with tetanus. Who would have to treat him? It could become her hard work. So why not just sit and let her do what needed to be done instead of pointless stubbornness? Tayo didn't know Yujin thought he was stubborn. He thought he was acting normally, just not causing her extra trouble. Better tell him to finish his doubts and sit on the couch already. She was tired of waiting. Yujin took a piece of cotton soaked in antiseptic with tweezers and treated the wound, warning it might sting a little. Tayo sat calmly while Yujin continued treating the wound. It was unusual for him that someone was trying to help ease his pain. He stayed brave, not flinching once. Yujin was able to treat the wound quickly and efficiently. She knew it was painful, but from Tayo's appearance, it seemed he had a very high pain tolerance. He barely reacted to the injury. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this story and what manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next installment.